ready, gang? We keep losing bodies. You ready, everybody? Yeah. Denisha and Anna. Oh. Thank you. All right. Can we? It's cement. It is, absolutely. All right. I think we just start this meeting with 5 of us. Right, Eddie? I agree. All right. Cass, you get a vote, okay, buddy? Sounds good. We'll get started in just a moment, folks, although I appreciate everyone's rapt attention right now. We're waiting, I think, on 1 or 2 more counselors to get a quorum. What do we need, Maureen? 9? Anyone know any good jokes?
You're all dirty. Hey, Eddie, how are you? Good, Frank. Hello, Julia. Hi, Frank.
All right.
1, 2, 3, 4.
We're going to need to start. We're good. Maureen? Okay. Carrie, we good, buddy? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Boston City Council. We are hereby in session. My name is Matt O'Malley. I am the President Pro Tempore and the District 6 Councilor. Today is June 30th, 2021, the last day of the fiscal year. And we have just gavelled in this meeting to order. Viewers can watch this council meeting either live, as we have many folks. Great to see these wonderful faces in this chamber. Residents at home can also stream this meeting by visiting boston.gov/citycouncil. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll to ascertain the presence of a quorum?
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilor Arroyo. Here. Councilor Baker.
Here.
Councilor Bok.
Present.
Councilor Braden.
Present.
Councilor Campbell.
Here.
Councilor Edwards. Councilor Sabi George.
Present.
Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Flynn.
Here.
Councilor Mejia.
Present.
Councilor O'Malley.
Present.
And Councilor Wu and company. Mr. President, we do have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Our esteemed Madam Clerk and President Emerita of the Boston City Council, Maureen Feeney, will be delivering the invocation today. After the invocation, Councilor Kenzie Bok will lead us as we deliver the Pledge of Allegiance. Madam Clerk, the floor is yours.
Thank you. As many of you know, the amazing Reverend Kim Crawford Harvey, who was the senior minister from the Arlington Street Church, was supposed to be here today and had a conflict. But she took the time to share some very special words with us. And although I will do an invocation, she wanted on the very last day of Pride Month to remember the struggles, the reality even today in the life of people of Boston and really throughout the country. This was a quote from Michael Fader, who was at the Stonewall riots. We all had a collective feeling like we had had enough of this kind of blank. It wasn't anything tangible anybody said to anyone else. It was just a kind of like everything over the years had come to a head. And on that particular night, in one particular place, it was not an organized demonstration. Everyone in the crowd felt they were never going back. It was like the last straw. It was a time to reclaim something that had always been taken from us. All kinds of people, all different reasons, but mostly it was total outrage, anger, sorrow, and everything combined. Everything just kind of ran its course. We were really trying to break free, and we felt that we had freedom at last, or freedom to at least show that we demanded freedom. We weren't going to be walking meekly into the night and letting them shove us around. It's like standing your ground for the first time in a really strong way, and that's what caught the police by surprise. There was something in the air, freedom, a long time overdue, and we're going to fight for it. It took different forms, but the bottom line was, we're not going away, and guess what? We didn't. So to our wonderful community of gay, lesbian, transgender, and Q, we are so proud to have you part of our city. So as I read this invocation, it seemed appropriate after the beautiful sharing of Reverend Crawford Harvey. O thou who madest one nation out of many people, amidst our diversity of race, tradition, and faith, unite us in a common love of freedom. Revive us in a spirit of devotion to common good, so that we may open doors to the neglected and oppressed. Cleanse the heart of our nation from that greed which preys upon others. Endow our leaders with wisdom so that they may stand among nations as examples of benevolence and exalted justice. Help us to make the land a common workshop of its people, where all may find their place and work, keen to do their best. Hear these words of Athenian Pericles. I would have you day by day fix your eyes upon the greatness of your country until you become filled with love for her. And when you are impressed by the spectacle of her glory, reflect that it has been acquired by good and compassionate women and men like you, who knew their duty and had the courage to do it. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Madam Clerk, for those inspiring messages. I now would invite every member of the audience and counselor who is able to please stand as Counselor Bok leads us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Counselor Bok. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. Madam Clerk, would you please note that Councilors Edwards and Flaherty have joined us, so we have a full contingent of the Boston City Council.
Thank you.
I also wanted to thank three of our friends, three great members of the Boston Fire Department, John Soares, John Sarro, and Mark Sanders have joined us. Welcome. I also wanted to acknowledge two remarkable interns, co-ops rather, from UMass Boston who've been helping the council, Denisha Bullock and Anna Huang. Thank you and welcome. And finally, I wanted to, if you'll all indulge me, offer a round of applause for the chair of the Ways and Means Committee because it is her birthday, in addition to being Budget Day. So happy birthday, Councilor Bok. Now on to the first order of business, which is the approval of the minutes. Is there any discussion on the matter? Seeing and hearing none, the chair moves to approve the minutes from the last meeting as presented. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The minutes of the last meeting stand as approved. We're now moving on to communications from Her Honor, the Mayor. Madam Clerk, would you please read dockets 0825 and 0826 together?
Thank you. Docket 0825, message and order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and expend an amount of $672,685.60 in the form of a grant for the FY22 Youth Works awarded by the Mass Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development, passed through the Economic Development and Industrial Corporation of Boston, to be administered by Youth and Engagement and Employment. The grant will fund the summer 2021 Success Link Employment Program. Docket number 0826, message and order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and expend an amount of $476,666 in the form of a grant for the nutrition services for Boston elders, awarded by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, passed to the Mass Executive Office of Elder Affairs to be administered at the Age Strong Commission. The grant will fund the FY21 Title 3C supplemental.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Dockets 0825 and 0826 shall be referred to the Committee on Strong Women, Families, and Communities. Madam Clerk, would you please read docket 0827?
Thank you. Docket 0827, message and order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and expend an amount of $52,963 in the form of a grant for the administrative costs of the Boston Area Plan awarded by the United States Department of Health and Human Services, passed to the Mass Executive Office of Elder Affairs to be administered by the Age Strong Commission. The grant will fund the FFY 2021 Title 3A supplemental.
Thank you very much. The Chair recognizes Councillor Liz Braden, the Chair of the Committee on Strong Women, Families, and Communities. Chair Braden, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would respectfully ask to suspend and pass the rules to accept and expend this sum of $52,963 so that it can be put to immediate use by the Age Strong Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Liz Braden, Chair of the Committee on Strong Women, Families, and Communities, seeks suspension of the rules and passage of docket 0827. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. The docket is hereby adopted, or passed, rather. Thank you. Moving on to petitions, memorials, and remonstrances. Madam Clerk, would you please read dockets 0828 through 0830 together?
Thank you. And these are three separate routes, and that's why they had to, the JITNs had to apply separately.
Thank you.
Docket 0828, petition of We Drive You, Inc. for a license to operate motor vehicles for the carriage of passengers for hire over certain streets in Boston. Docket number 0829, petition of We Drive You, Inc. for a license to operate motor vehicles for the carriage of passengers for hire over certain streets in Boston. And docket number 0830, petition of We Drive You, Inc. for a license to operate vehicles for the carriage of passengers for hire over certain streets in Boston.
Thank you. Dockets 0828, 0829, and 0830 shall be referred to the Committee on City and Neighborhood Services. Reports of public officers and others. Madam Clerk, would you please read docket 0831?
Thank you. Docket 0831, the Constable Bonds of Callum Long, Bramden Pennington, and Mark Vickers have been duly approved by the Collector Treasurer, were received.
Thank you very much. The Chair recognizes Councillor Andrea Campbell, the Chair of the Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice. Councillor Campbell, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. I thought you were going to do this. My apologies. So I seek suspension of the rules and approval of this under the usual terms and conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Andrea Campbell, Chair of the Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice, seeks, under usual terms and conditions, seeks approval, suspension of the rules and approval of docket 0831, which are constable bonds. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Docket 0831 has passed. Madam Clerk, would you please read docket 0832 and 0833 together?
Thank you. Docket 0832, notice is received from the City Clerk in accordance with Chapter 6 of the Ordinances of 1979 regarding action taken by the Mayor on papers acted upon by the City Council at its meeting of June 9th, 2021. Docket number 0833, notice is received from the City Clerk in accordance with Chapter 6 of the Ordinances of 1979 regarding action taken by the Mayor on papers acted upon by the City Council at its meeting of June 16th, 2021.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Docket 0832 and 0833 will be placed on file. Reports of committees is next on our agenda. Madam Clerk, would you please read docket 0389?
Thank you, Mr. President. Docket 0389, the Committee on Planning, Development, and Transportation, to which was referred on March 3rd, 2021, docket number 0389. Message and order for your approval to declare surplus city-owned former Transportation Department parcels of land and transfer the care, custody, management, and control of said property to the Public Facilities Commission. The land is located at 18 Hamlet Street in Dorchester, Mass., Ward 7, parcel 039160000, consisting of approximately 1,450 square feet of vacant land and an unnumbered parcel on Hamlet Street, Dorchester, Mass., Ward 7, parcel number 3894000, consisting approximately of 34,270 square feet of vacant land. Submits a report recommending the order ought to pass.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The Chair recognizes Councilor Michelle Wu, the Chair of the Committee on Planning, Development, and Transportation. Chair Wu, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. This was actually part of the hearing that we had held 2 weeks ago, and we moved on several of the dockets already last week, but we're holding this one just to give more time to make sure we distributed and sought feedback on the RFP draft, which has been done. We also were not able, the district councilor had a conflict for that hearing, so we wanted to give time to ensure that he had the chance to vet everything as well, so I'll certainly defer to him in comments following this. Today I wanted to move forward with this. This is part of a visioning process that has been occurring in the Upham's Corner area over a period of years, and this is part of 3 parcels that are within that discussion. This particular parcel would be for a mixed-use development, and in order to move forward, they are seeking the council surplus order to have the RFP officially go out and be able to bring in the proposals for affordable housing and retail as well. Thank you very much. And again, I'll defer to the District 3 councilor.
Thank you, the Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. The Chair recognizes the District 3 Councilor. Councilor Baker, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I just thank the chair of the committee for allowing me the extra week, and I'm very comfortable with moving this forward. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. So, Chair Michelle Wu, Chair of the Committee on Planning, Development, and Transportation, seeks acceptance of the committee report and passage of docket 0389, as this is a land swap type deal. I'm going to ask for a roll call. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Certainly. Councilor Arroyo on docket 0389.
Yes.
Councilor Arroyo, yes. Councilor Baker.
Aye.
Councilor Baker, aye. Councilor Bok. Aye. Councilor Bok, aye. Councilor Braden. Aye. Councilor Braden, aye. Councilor Campbell. Yes. Councilor Campbell, yes. Councilor Edwards. Yes. Councilor Edwards, yes. Councilor Asabi George. Yes. Councilor Asabi George, yes. Councilor Flaherty. Yes. Councilor Flaherty, yes. Councilor Flynn.
Yes.
Councilor Flynn, yes. Councilor Mejia. Aye. Councilor Mejia, aye. Councilor O'Malley.
Yes.
Councilor O'Malley, yes. And Councilor Wu. Yes. Councilor Wu, yes. Mr. President, docket number 0389 has passed unanimously.
Thank you very much. Moving right along, Madam Clerk, would you please read docket 0548?
Thank you. Docket 0548, the Committee on Community Preservation Act, to which was referred on April 14th, 2021, docket number 0548. Message and order approving an appropriation of $1,012,400 for the administrative and operating expenses of the City of Boston Community Preservation Committee, known as the CPC, for the fiscal year 2022, and a further appropriation order in the amount of $28,479,574 for the community preservation, known as the fund. Estimated annual revenues for fiscal year 2022 to be appropriated and reserved for future appropriations. Submits a report recommending the order ought to pass.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The Chair recognizes Councilor Michael Flaherty, Chair of the Committee on the Community Preservation Act. Chair Flaherty, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The docket was referred to committee on April 14th. We held a hearing on June 24th where many administration officials were present. The fund, as you recall, was created upon the adoption of the CPA in November of 2016 and is funded in part by 1% property tax surcharge on residential and business property tax bills that took effect in July 2017. Mass General Laws, Chapter 44B, Section 6 provides that in each fiscal year the Council shall make appropriations from the fund as it deems necessary for administrative and operating expenses of the CPC and that such appropriations shall not exceed 5% of the fund's annual revenues. To fund the CPC operations in fiscal year '22, an appropriation in the amount of $41,012,400 is requested. Additionally, in order to appropriate and reserve funds for future spending, an appropriation in the amount of $28,479,574 is requested for the appropriation for future recommendations and from the CPC. The committee inquired about the city's outreach efforts, allowable expenses, strategic planning, bond flexibility, data and reporting requirements. This docket appropriates an amount for administrative and operating expenses of the CPC that does not exceed the 5% of the fund's annual revenues. Therefore, as chair, I'm recommending docket 0548 ought to pass. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Councillor Flaherty. Anyone else looking to speak on this docket? Seeing and hearing no takers, Councillor Michael Flaherty, Chair of the Committee on the Community Preservation Act, seeks acceptance of the committee report and passage of docket 0548. Again, given the fact that we're talking about multiple $1 million, I'll ask for a roll call. Madam Clerk, would you please proceed?
Thank you. On docket 0548, Councilor Arroyo.
Yes.
Councilor Arroyo, yes. Councilor Baker. Aye. Councilor Baker, aye. Councilor Bok. Aye. Councilor Bok, aye. Councilor Braden. Aye. Councilor Braden, aye. Councilor Campbell. Yes. Councilor Campbell, yes. Councilor Edwards. Councilor Edwards, yes. Thank you. Councilor Savvy-George. Yes. Councilor Savvy-George, yes. Councilor Flaherty.
Yes.
Councilor Flaherty, yes. Councilor Flynn.
Yes.
Councilor Flynn, yes. Councilor Mejia. Yes. Councilor Mejia, yes. Councilor O'Malley.
Yes.
Councilor O'Malley, yes. And Councilor Wu. Yes. Councilor Wu, yes. Mr. President, docket number 0548 has passed unanimously.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. We are now moving on to matters recently heard for possible action. For those watching, this is where we're discussing the budgets before us. So, Madam Clerk, would you please read docket 0801?
Thank you. Docket 0801, message and order for the annual appropriation and tax order for FY 2022.
Thank you very much. The Chair recognizes Councillor Kenzie Bok, Chair of the Committee on Ways and Means. Chair Bok, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. And I do have a committee report on this docket. So while that's being passed out, before I begin to address the docket, I just wanted to make sure to make a little bit of time for some budget process thank yous. So I would be remiss not to thank our central staff who have made just a huge number of hearings and working sessions happen behind the scenes without complaint, including 3 in the last week. So as councilors know, that team in particular is Michelle Goldberg, who's passing this out right now, Shane Pack and Cora Montrond, and then on the hearings logistics side, Carrie Jordan and Candace Morales. So it's really, I think everyone knows the budget's an effort of the entire central staff, but I wanted to shout those folks out in particular. On my staff, Emily Brown, who's up in the corner, has been an incredible budget director for me. And I just want to thank by name my entire staff. So Lauren, Kennedy, Henry, and our fellows, Lydia, Chris, and Megan, because while I'm focused on budget, the work of the District 8 office continues, and they've all been tremendous. And I will take the privilege of thanking all of your staffs on your own behalfs as well, because we have had so many policy staff and others coming and asking questions and providing you all with detailed research and analysis throughout this process. And so I just think it's important for us to acknowledge the folks behind the scenes here for us as the council, and on the administration side, really sincere thanks to the Office of Budget Management team. So Justin Sterrett, who's now the CFO, but was the budget director when this got drafted, Jim Williamson and Joanna Bernstein, and all of the analysts whose names councilors don't hear but spend a lot of time in the weeds, and just all the departments who came to our hearings, the public who testified. It takes a village to make a budget, and the last category I'd be remiss not to mention IGR, Chantal, our council liaison, who has 13 of us to keep track of, and we're so grateful for her work, and Neil and Caitlin and Chris Osgood. So just wanted to extend those thanks before I jump into the dockets. I think now that everyone has the committee report, I want to speak to the operating budget. So last week in this chamber, it was clear that councilors did not feel that the operating budget, even the resubmitted version, adequately met the moment of the challenges that the city is facing, and there was a lot of concern. And we talked then about the need for the council to take a leadership role in getting us to yes by today. My birthday, yes, but more importantly, the end of the fiscal year. And I'm just so proud of this body that this council took that leadership, and that everybody made time for the 3 speedily scheduled working sessions and hearings, and that we've been able to go back and forth with the administration and reach an agreement on a $31.5 million supplemental to really make down payments on some of those major areas that councilors raised and addressed. And so that's a late file. You'll be seeing it later in the program, but it reflects getting us up to $20 million in new funding for the Acquisition Opportunity Program, which is really one of our keys to achieving better affordable housing in the city. So it's another 15.4 on top of the 4.6. It's in another docket. Includes $3 million more for Mass and Cass to double our commitment there. $3 million more for green jobs, which really just had a sort of $1 million down payment in this budget before. Another $2 million for social supports and BPS. Another $500 on top of the $300 in the resubmission for young adult jobs for 19 to 24-year-olds. An exciting new program we're psyched about. More money, another $500,000 for High Roads Kitchen, another $600,000 for the BHA Wi-Fi project to get us up to $1 million there to really make sure our public housing tenants have access to the internet, as we've learned so urgently that they need in this time. Another $1 million for digital infrastructure in the city, $2 million to really start a program focused on land trusts and supporting them in the city, another $2 million for slow streets, and another $500,000 for green home retrofits. So obviously a supplemental like this is an unprecedented thing. I think we find ourselves in an unprecedented situation, and I'm very, very grateful to the council for really speaking up and raising these things, and us getting to a place where we as a council can feel comfortable. This is a council's budget, it's a people's budget. And these things complement many of the good things that were already in the operating budget. So when we're talking about money, now $1.3 million to implement OPAT that was passed by this council 6 months ago, more funds for historic preservation, some major new programs for our immigrant community, including a Dreamers Fellowship this summer, including a new TPS program in the resubmission, study to focus on municipal broadband when we talk about what would really move the needle in digital infrastructure. I will not list everything because councilors have been good about coming to these hearings and working sessions, and I know that many of the budget, the budget's been pulled apart in lots of ways, but I just want to stress, I think, that between the supplemental that the administration has filed and we have an opportunity to vote on today, and this operating docket and the other ancillary dockets that we'll be moving through, that we are in a place where I'm going to be urging passage. Now, I want to acknowledge, before I formally do that, Mr. President, that this budget's not perfect. It's far from perfect. I think many members of the council harbor significant concerns about whether we are actually on track to achieve the overtime savings budgeted for in the police department, not least because we struggled so much to achieve those last year. I think that there are many things that we're making starts towards in this budget that councilors feel that we should be doing more on. And again, the supplemental was a move to address that. But the one that's really big there, right, is moving AOP. But there are other things like that we could move at a much grander scale. I think what I want to emphasize from this seat as Ways and Means Chair is that there is a field of contest right now about the future of the city. It's the mayor's race, and I think we're having a really robust conversation about where we're going. And I am very confident that the next elected mayor of Boston is a member of this body. And I think that when that person walks into office in mid-November, whether it is Mayor Janey, Mayor Campbell, Mayor Asapi George, Mayor Wu, I think that person is going to they're going to be faced with a million decisions, and a lot of those decisions are going to be about how to implement the budget and how to actually use appropriation authority to lead this city. And in our city system, there is no substitute for leadership. But we need them to have the raw material to hit the ground running and to show that leadership for the city. And in the meantime, in this strange moment, we, the council, we are the stewards of the city. And I think that we owe the city stable finances and really those well-funded departments that any elected mayor is going to need in November. So I've been thinking a lot about, this is slightly off topic, but it's also my last day as a lecturer at Harvard because I'm giving up that gig because this takes too much time. I've been thinking a lot about, there's this favorite theologian of mine, and for the folks who are suing us, because I think we talk about God too much at the council, I swear this is an analogy, not theology. There's a famous theologian who I read a lot when I was in grad school, there's this kind of classic mood debate in Christian theology between people who think that we should focus more on the brokenness of the world and kind of meet that brokenness with a no of condemnation, and the people who think we should, focus more on the celebration of the world and sort of its belovedness and meet that more with a yes. And of course, like, the no folks think the yes folks like gloss over all the injustice and things that are wrong in the world, and the yes folks think that the no folks are sort of stuck in a place that's more despairing and hopeless than we can live in. And this favorite theologian of mine, he has this point that says the word we have to say to the world is not no and it's not yes. It's to see the brokenness and own that, and then to say nevertheless. And I think about that a lot because I think about how to move through a world that's broken and beloved in ways that is both true and compassionate. And I think that, I know that to bring it from theology to budget seems like a leap, but when I think about what the city needs from us in this moment and what I'm asking of colleagues, it is your affirmative vote today, but it's not so much your yes as your nevertheless. And I think that we've gotten there together. I'm grateful to this whole body for its leadership. Mr. President, I do, as the committee report says, recommend that this docket 0801 ought to pass. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Councilor Bok. As a proud graduate of Boston College, I've always felt that Harvard was overrated. So no worries. You'll be able to find another spot at some point. But on behalf of all of our colleagues, I just want to let you know that we appreciate all of your hard work, effort, and detail that went into preparation for today. So I know personally, spoke to you last night well into the evening, past 11 o'clock. I know you were here at the office doing your best to try to get this council to yes. And so I speak personally on that, but I know that all of our colleagues appreciate your work as our leader and chair in the budget process. So with that, the chair recognizes our present City Councilor Matt O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for stealing my opening lines, but I'm happy to repeat it as well. You were very magnanimous and correct in going through your thanks, Chair Bok, particularly for central staff, and Michelle, Kerry, Christine, just everybody. As I mentioned, our co-ops, Denisha and Anna, your team, I think all of our teams. I want to give a shout out to Jessica Morris, my chief of staff, and Anna Fonseca. But you also deserve tremendous credit for the way that you have handled this unforgivingly difficult job with cheer, with aplomb, with tenacity, and that's what we need. So well done and happy birthday. You know, it is easy to vote against a budget. You could cherry pick a million things and make that your basis to vote against something. And the acting mayor knows that because she voted against the operating budget last year. The hard work is getting to yes. And in this, my final budget on the council, I am enormously proud of each and every one of you who's put the work in to make this a stronger and a better budget. You know, last year, technically, and then it was reaffirmed last month due to the leadership of Councillor Edwards, we're hoping to put forth a remarkable and impactful change on how this city does budgets in allowing better balance with the city council. We have done that without the referendum. I still will campaign that the referendum had passed, but my point being, we have done that with this budget. This is as much the council's budget as it is the mayor's budget, and it's for that reason that I will be supporting it and urging all of you to support it as well. We could all go through some of the incredibly impactful allocations that we fought for, obviously. I'm so proud to partner with Liz Braden and so many others on so many environmental initiatives, and we're seeing that in green jobs. We're seeing that in allocation as it relates to how we do waste diversion. We're seeing it as something that came up that we're looking forward to complement our work on building standards, on setting a fund that's going to allow for people of Boston, residents of Boston, to access small grants so that they can make their homes more energy efficient. That's work that we did together, and that's work that got us to this good place. You know, the other reason, and I had mentioned this in my remarks last week, is that it is a very different year than last year. I think the budget, there's some similarity, but just given the fact that last time at this vote, first of all, we weren't together. We were on a Zoom, and we were in month 3 of a pandemic. Now we seem to be coming out of that pandemic, but we are still in a position of transition. And we're still in a position, quite frankly, where unfortunately, nationally, and this is in the Commonwealth, is in the city as well, people have become polarized. And what we are seeking to do here, and what I think the chair has helped facilitate, is a budget, a balanced budget that seeks to find common ground. And that's what we should be doing. And sadly, there seems to be less of an appetite for that in politics at the moment. I hope that changes, and I'm committed to doing everything I can to get that to change. Let's find some areas where we can work together. We're not going to agree on everything. Lord knows that's not the case. No one agrees with everything, anyone on everything. But we can at least work hard to try to remove the politics and demonstrate leadership. And I'm proud of this body because I think we've shown leadership. I come at this, I mentioned at the working session the other day, really wearing 2 hats. The District 6 counselor, who is proud to report he's been able to help facilitate through this budget, through capital, through operating, through others, some real strong wins for the people of Jamaica Plain, West Roxbury, Rosendale, Back of the Hill, and Roxbury. And I'm incredibly proud of that and look forward to many of these ribbons will be cut when I am a private citizen, but I will be there incredibly proud of the people who helped us get it done. But I also wear the hat of being your council president pro tempore. I was not elected council president. I am here because Council President Janey is acting mayor by virtue of the city charter and the resignation of former Mayor Walsh. So I'm the accidental council president, but I take supporting this body incredibly seriously. I take bringing us together and standing up for all of us, even if this will not likely be a unanimous vote today. I don't kid myself in that belief, but at least making sure that we had a process where everyone could feel valued, respected, and a co-author of this budget, and I believe we've done that as best that we can. That's why I'll be voting yes, and I'll urge each and every one of you to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. Chair recognizes City Councilor Anissa Sabi-George, Chair of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Council President O'Malley. First, I'd also like to thank Central staff for all of their hard work on this budget. Certainly, as we existed in this hybrid world, part virtual, part in person. I'd also like to thank colleagues on this body for their work over this last couple of months, and tireless work it certainly was. I'd specifically like to acknowledge Councilor Bok for her leadership here on her birthday, but more importantly for her work as chair of the Ways and Means Committee and for guiding us through another budget season. I'd also like to thank Council President O'Malley for his work, who has been a steadfast leader for this body during both the budget process and beyond, and we need your leadership going forward, especially in these next couple of months. Thank you for that, and thank you for all that you've done. I'd like to thank the hundreds of City of Boston employees who have worked tirelessly throughout this pandemic and well before that to serve the residents of this great city, but most importantly during this very difficult time. As an at-large city councilor representing the entire city of Boston, the budget review process is perhaps one of the most important functions of my role in public office and has been a priority for me since I took office in 2016. Today I will vote on these 3 budgets that are before us. I will vote yes to the capital budget, I will vote yes to the operating budget, and I will vote yes to the education budget. This operating budget, as resubmitted, is what we have before us today increases the cost of living adjustment base, which further provides supports. It also further provides supports for our restaurants, invests in youth jobs, and provides financial support for the Immigrant Defense Fund and the TPS program. These investments are important, but they do not cover everything that I'd like to certainly see in this budget. They do not respond to all of the needs and requests for our residents. I am disappointed to not see us investing some of our federal money towards a public health surge to better connect individuals with substance use disorder and stimulant use disorder with immediate triage and medical services, followed by an opportunity to enter detox and recovery. We need to respond with urgency and provide individuals suffering with substance use disorder and mental illness the services they need and the support that they need. I'd also like to have seen greater support for our small businesses and investments toward increasing our residents' access to city services by updating the 311 app to include additional information such as online voter registration, online SNAP applications, locations of sharp collection kiosks, locations of open detox and recovery beds, and domestic violence and mental health resources. This is the work that is left undone. And as every budget wraps up, my time here on the City Council, I've been committed to continuing the work towards this and those missing pieces starting now. The Boston Public Schools has been through a lot due to this pandemic. And as chair of the Education Committee, I have thoughtfully considered my vote. And while I'll be voting yes today, this budget, using federal dollars, has commitments to provide those additional 13 social workers to be placed in the Boston Public Schools, ensuring that every one of our schools has a full-time social worker in the building come September. That's certainly a step in the right direction. But I acknowledge this far from perfect budget leaves a lot of work for us to do. In order to set up our children for success and resolve the systemic failures in our school system, the social, the emotional, the behavioral, the mental and physical well-being of our children must be a priority as we work to re-engage them in their academics. We need to increase funding to have more mental health professionals in our schools and in our communities. We need to improve and expand our school libraries. We need to make sure that we are doing inclusion right. Our children deserve to be in schools that provide them with all they need in order to have a successful and fulfilling experience. Our students need resources and basic services that all of our schools, that some of our schools already have, but all of them should. The resources to treat those social and emotional, behavioral, mental and physical well-being issues, that we have that well-stocked library, that we have that robust inclusion program, that we are providing special education supports, especially right now, that we have art, music, swimming, financial literacy, athletics, that we allow opportunities for students to explore their full self, that we have 21st century school buildings, fully functioning HVAC systems, appropriately sized and resourced science labs, spaces for nurses, and developmentally appropriate classroom technology. And of course, our bathrooms, that they are clean, that they are gender affirming, and they are regularly stocked with doors and soap and toilet paper and menstrual products. Our children, no matter their ability or their background or the neighborhood that they live in, deserve to be in a school that provides them with all of those things. There is work left undone, and I am committed to continue that work starting now. And while I'm voting in favor of these budgets, I know that they would have been more reflective of the unmet needs of our city and its residents if the process was more productive. And if we all had an opportunity to fully collaborate with the interim administration, we could have got more done. Ultimately, we need to step up and stop playing politics with our kids' futures in particular, the livelihoods of our dedicated City of Boston employees, and the services that are a lifeline for our residents who are trying to bounce back from a devastating global pandemic. Good government is a working government. It's making progress. We have a responsibility and an opportunity to do that here today, make progress. And that's why I'm voting yes. We vote, and then as soon as we leave this chamber today, we continue to do the work that our residents here in the City of Boston have entrusted us to do. I am committed to continue that work, and it starts at the end of this meeting today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councillor Saibi George. I don't see any other microphones picked. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on these? And I will just note that the only docket before us now is the operating. You can do as Councilor Sabi George did and also get into remarks on education and capital if you would like, or there will be other opportunities to weigh in as well. So the chair recognizes the district council from East Boston, Councilor Lydia Edwards. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm going to echo my colleagues and say thank you to central staff, to my staff, to our clerk, to the president, and especially to my friend and my colleague, our freshman city councilor from Beacon Hill, Councilor Bok. It's really important for us to recognize, for the public to recognize what she did in this moment. And oftentimes going toe-to-toe, chest-to-chest bump, and we were going at this. But Councilor Bok, in her leadership, made me refocus. She made me see what needed to happen, and also she heard me. And because of her creativity and her leadership, we had the first time a hearing on a supplemental budget in Boston's history that I know of. And it's because of her having that hearing and her pushing back on the administration, I was able to get certain things from my district and for the city. And so it's because of her that I believe that we were going to be able to pass this budget. That being said, I have reservations. And before I get into the specificities of that, I just want to talk a little bit about this process in and of itself, this merry-go-round, this little farce that we've done one too many times. I know the recent charter amendment that we proposed was dismissed as a power grab from this body. It was dismissed in an ill-informed, inaccurate, factually wrong opinion that could have been corrected if you just got on the phone with me. That being said, we're here today and doing this system, but asking for the people of Boston to change what we have and the tools in the toolbox that we have today. What's pending right now is the question as to whether we need to change this system. And we, this body, unanimously proposed that question. It's pending at the Attorney General right now, so she can hopefully formulate that question, and then ultimately the answer will be met by the people of Boston this fall. This merry-go-round is not systemic. This merry-go-round is not about change. This merry-go-round incentivizes incrementalism and infantilizes this body. We are powerful. We can go toe-to-toe. We can push and we can move. And the reform that we have proposed, this body has proposed, will have us every year, not in this fight, not in this wondering, not in this popcorn watching moment if we're going to pass a budget or not. Every year, if we pass this, on the 30th, we will pass a budget. That's what it requires. It'll be a budget that is between the mayor, the council, and back and forth. And people will watch us fight to the best of our capabilities. I am so proud of this body. I'm actually more proud of us when we disagree, because we push each other then. Agreeing and just following to get along, that's easy. That's the easy part. It's when we go to fight for our districts, for what we believe in, that I think we rise to the best occasion. And I will say again that this moment required us to rise to yet another occasion. That's why the supplemental budget as proposed, as I understand, I'm going to list the things that I believe we were able to get. And we will wait for that late file. But the supplemental budget now has $20 million in total for the AOP, Acquisition Opportunity Program. For the first time, $2 million for a land trust program for the city of Boston to help us purchase land and to help us get ahead where private market might be able to take land away and develop properties that are simply not affordable. We are taking a first step, though we are certainly not actually providing access for every city service in every language online by promoting digital infrastructure with $1 million. That's key. That's necessary. That's meeting the moment. And while I am certainly thankful for the back and forth with Counselor Bok. I could critique and go back and forth about what did or didn't happen, but that's not why I'm here. That's not why you're here. That's not what we were elected to do. I think this budget will pass like a kidney stone, but it'll pass. And it is that process. I mean, that's not as articulate as your nevertheless, Councilor Bok, but still, nevertheless, I think it will happen because of the back and forth, because of how much we're standing up for our districts. I'm going to go ahead and speak on the school budget. I am disappointed that we are making a move and talking about the school budget while I believe something very systemic is happening this evening. I would have preferred the conversation about where we're going to put our exams, while I understand the task force has released their recommendations, but the final actual vote, the movement, is this evening. And so we're here now, hoping, thinking that they will do what the task force says. Some people hope, some people don't, I don't know. But the fact is, I don't like that we're making this vote right now. I don't like it at all. I think we should personally recess and pull this and hold it in committee until they make their decision. So, in as much as that's not going to happen, I will have to make a vote, and I will make that vote. But for right now, I want to thank my colleagues. I want to thank the central staff again, and I just want to acknowledge again, real systemic change doesn't come in an annual budget vote where this body is not given the powers and the tools that it needs. It comes from a democratic process where people will have direct impact in their budget, and it can come this November. So I encourage everyone to vote for that ballot initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Edwards. The chair recognizes the at-large councillor from Dorchester, Councillor Julia Mejia. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Councillor Bok. You have handled this like a champ. So I'm just going to read my prepared remarks, but I also just wanted to know this, to reflect on, this is my second budget, and I have a growth mindset, and I've learned a lot about the process, and I've learned a lot about politics and how all of these things play out when we're talking about people's lives and who shows up and who doesn't, and who gets heard and who gets left behind. And it's disheartening, having grown up here in the city of Boston, that I find myself in a place where the fight continues to be so ugly here in Boston. But I'm here for all of it, because if anyone knows anything about me, I'm always ready for a good fight. So let me stick to my remarks. Thank you, Mr. President. Our budget vote is perhaps the most important aspect of our jobs here on the council. Our budget is a value statement, but simply saying that does not make it true, and we all know that. It's through our actions, our advocacy, and our commitment to being a microphone for our community that truly makes a budget a statement of our values. This is the people's budget, period. And we have a job of making sure it is worthy of their approval. While we have been continuing to learn about this process and how our money is being spent, we have been working hard to make sure that the people are learning alongside us, because the people should not be obstacles to the work. They should be directly involved in decision-making processes. As I mentioned, we are exponential learners in our office, so we set out to make the budget process a much more engaging experience. We hosted virtual community conversations, one with Councilor Bok, who had a dope PowerPoint presentation, thank you very much. And we even took the budget talks to the streets. We traveled throughout the city to barbershops, hair salons, and schools to ask people how they wanted their money to be spent, something that many of them had never even been asked before. The people made their voices loud and clear. We need to see money for youth jobs, green jobs, job opportunities for artists and low-income workers. We need to see the city take a serious interest in municipal broadband. We need to respond to the needs of small businesses, especially those who have been the hardest hit by the pandemic. and we need to reinvest in public safety dollars towards proven violence prevention methods. The decision that we have made around this budget vote wasn't made in a vacuum. We have pulled in advocates and community leaders into this space and have spoken with, we've spoken with them nearly every day. Caroline Chow, George Lee, Fatima Ahmad, David Weiner, you have taken all of our calls day and at night and have been patient with us as we explored all the different avenues for justice and have been tireless leaders standing up for your community and their interests. Your advocacy inspires us, and we can all learn a lesson from your leadership skills. By working with the advocates and the administration, here's what we were able to make happen with this budget. We created a new line item in our budget with over $800,000 dedicated to support youth jobs, specifically for young people ages 19 to 24. We have also received millions of dollars for other job-creating programs for artists, low-income workers, green jobs, and more. We've secured over $300,000 to ensure that outdoor dining, which helped save a lot of small businesses during the pandemic, remain permanent as part of our efforts. We have gotten a financial commitment from the administration for a municipal broadband study. This isn't a study of whether or not we should have municipal broadband. We already know that we do. This study is to explore exactly how we can get to that point. Through our advocacy, we have worked with the administration to create a new Office of Language and Communication Access, which will soon be guided by our ordinance, and we have received financial support to fully implement our residential kitchen ordinance. We have ensured that ethnic studies and a Parent as Mentors leadership development effort is part of our BPS programming, in addition to securing funding to support the social and emotional well-being of our most vulnerable learners. We have also secured funding for community hub schools with BTU staff. When we think about these line items, don't just think about them as numbers. Think about BATA and the amazing work that they do to empower communities of color, immigrant families, and people who are learning English. Think about all the students of color who can begin the process of learning about their history. Think about 32BJ, who work incredibly hard to represent employees who are often undervalued in our society. People like my mom. Think about the artists who have struggled over the past year and half who will benefit from this funding. This is their budget, and we have an obligation to fight for them. But with all that said, we cannot ignore the elephant in the room. The fact of the matter is that we're not where we need to be when it comes to public safety reforms. Last year, when everybody was calling for a 10% cut, we were pushing for 15%. This year, we only managed 1%. That isn't good enough, and we'll be pushing for more in the coming months and years. But we also have to be realistic about the times that we're in. We have an appointed mayor and no police commissioner. What we are achieving here and what we'll be achieving in the coming months is due to the leadership of the community and our commitment to respond to the needs of the people and not the limits of our broken system. We need to adopt a growth mindset and keep in mind that this is a battle, not the war. With that being said, I'll be voting in favor of this budget. No budget is ever perfect, and it can feel like we always get the crumbs, which you already know that's always the case. But we are in a much better place this year with this budget than we were last year. And it doesn't matter who sits in the mayor's chair. It's not about Mayor Janey or Mayor Walsh. It's about the people. Everybody needs to be accountable, including myself. Our time in this chamber isn't about pretty speeches or pats in the back. It's about service to the people. And whether I'm in this chamber or not, I will always fight for the people, because the people who put me here are the only ones that could take me out. So with that said, while I am proud to support this budget because I know we delivered for our people, I know that we have a lot of work to do, and I'm here for all of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. The chair recognizes the district councilor from South Boston, Councilor Ed Flynn. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Thank you, Mr. President, and I also want to thank Councilor Bok for her tremendous leadership during this difficult period of time, but also thanking my City Council colleagues for working so hard during this budget process, along with the City Council central staff and in the Mayor's office as well. I don't want to repeat what a lot of was said here today, but I will be voting in support of the 3 dockets because although a budget is not perfect, it does put us on strong fiscal stability, but also making sure that we provide the necessary basic city services and quality of life to our residents, and that includes pedestrian safety-related issues, infrastructure improvements. Our streets and sidewalks are dangerous. A speeding car is a public health emergency. We need to slow down these cars, but we also have to make sure that our sidewalks and streets are safe for everybody, and that includes speed humps and stop signs and road humps, and making sure that our elderly, our seniors, and young children can cross the streets. ISD is a critical agency in our city. We also have the ability here through this budget to hire additional ISD inspectors that will inspect after-hour construction. They will inspect construction sites, short-term rentals that are also popping up across the city, even after we had the agreement with Airbnb. We still see short-term rentals taking place in the city. I think this budget also reflects our commitment to those most in need, including services for persons with disabilities, language access, age strong, workforce development is also critical. I represent, as you know, a large immigrant and Asian community, and I'm proud that there's going to be a huge increase in the Human Rights Commission in their budget, language access, food access. We saw during this pandemic the incredible role that our city workers played also during this pandemic, whether they were public works or they were water and sewer or school teachers or janitors. But each city resident and city employee did their part during this difficult time. Our fire department, our police department, our EMS as well. Again, it's not a perfect budget. I continue to advocate that we need a police, fire, EMS presence in the South Boston waterfront, which we're lacking, or the Fort Point neighborhood. We also don't have a public library there. Those are issues that I will continue to focus on to make sure that my constituents also have basic city services. And that's critical as we see the response time going up in the seaport, the South Boston waterfront area. Again, I want to thank my colleagues here in the City Council. I want to thank the clerk and her team, the Mayor's office, my staff, but also the people of Boston that have responded to us through email, through text, through office visits, and meeting them at the coffee shop or at the supermarket, letting us know what's important to them. And after all, that's the most important part of our job, is listening to the concerns of our constituents and taking their input into these matters. So again, I want to say thank you to Councilor Bok and to Council President O'Malley for their great work during this very difficult time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Councilor Flynn. The chair recognizes the District Council from Dorchester, Councilor Frank Baker. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to state that I will be in support of operations and capital. I mean, there's money in there for down on Mass and Cass for a not a temporary but a permanent comfort station, and money for Woods Mullen. Still no bathrooms down there. Still no surety that I have a place for the outreach team to go to, but we're working on those. There's good money for hoarding situations, which in my 10 years here, I've come across probably 6 or 7 of them. I actually have one live case right now, and it's pretty sad to look at. The Chief of Workforce Development, I believe, is a really good move. It's not on the list here, but from what I understand, we're reinstating fire chief positions over in West Roxbury, which is good for your district. I don't see the Delta car reinstated, but we're working on that. So like any budget, there's good things, there's things that aren't so good. Money for acquisition, which I believe the city should be much more aggressive in acquisition of properties, so we could, again, control our destiny when it comes to affordable housing and those sorts of things. It would have been easy to be political on this budget here. There's not support for our 400A officers, meaning the munis, if someone were coming in to attack our chair that did such a great job, thank you for doing, by the way, the munis would not be able to take the person off her from attacking her. That'd be my job, probably. I don't want to do that job. We don't have surety on what the school police are going to do. I'm very uncomfortable with that sort of stuff. And I'll talk about the school later. But I am serious about our bond ratings. We're in a good situation because of decisions not being made here today, decisions that started being made 20, 30 years ago from mayors like Eddie's father, Mayor Menino, Mayor Walsh. We're a AAA bond rating. That's no joke. We're in good shape. Our OPEB, our pension liability is close to being solvent. I challenge you to find any place else in the country that can say that. There aren't any. So we're in a very good position here. I will be voting in favor for it. And thank you for your leadership. Kenzie, of course, amazing job, and everybody on the staff from Justin's team upstairs to Michelle and our team here. Good work. It's been difficult in the pandemic. Now we're back in. Welcome to, it's a whole lot of people up there. That's a crowded house. Nice to see. Nice to be here. But thank you, Mr. President. And again, I will be voting yes on capital and operating.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. The chair recognizes the district councillor from Hyde Park, Councillor Arroyo. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor Bok. I want to take a moment to thank my staff, especially Yasmin Radasi, my policy director, and my budget director, who has been instrumental to me throughout this process and just breaking down a very dense budget. I want to thank central staff, and I want to thank the mayor's administration for their work on this budget as well. I want to touch on a couple of things. I think folks have talked about this budget's not a perfect budget. I've never seen a perfect budget. We're never going to see a perfect budget. It's cliche. And so from where I'm at, I weigh this a little different. I've heard things about it's the mayor's budget, it's the city council's budget. I reject that kind of ownership over these budgets. I understand all of the systemic ways in which these budgets are created, but I understand that this is city money for city residents, and it impacts our residents. And so it's difficult for me. This is my second budget. It's difficult for me to not to hear sort of the commentary on this budget and this process and not juxtapose that with the commentary that I heard last year on last year's budget and last year's process, and to see sort of the about faces that I have seen from folks ultimately on that budget to this budget. It's been jarring. And I think what I would speak to specifically about this budget in terms in relations to last year's budget, every budget, and I truly believe this, I think it was Menino who said that government has the ability, and I'm paraphrasing, government has the ability to make an impact in people's lives, and that's why he got into it. And I think one of the things that I've always been cognizant of, especially as a person of color in the city of Boston, is that budgets in government have the ability to not just help, but they also hurt. They also have the ability to marginalize. They have the ability to make inequity. They have the ability to choose and pick and choose which issues we're going to touch today and which issues we're not. And I struggle with the ways in which these budget processes bring that to light. There's things in this budget that I adore. There's defense for immigration defense fund money. There's money in this budget for creating alternative responses to policing. There's money in this budget for summer jobs and for year-round summer youth jobs. And there's places where I think it could have gone farther. There's I'm going to touch on sort of the issue that hasn't been spoken about too much, which is what we do when we talk about public safety, when we talk about reallocation of funding here. And I think one of the things that has become clear over the last 2 years and much, much longer than that for some folks is that the state of policing doesn't work for everybody, in not just the city of Boston, but in the state, in the country. There's some real deficiencies in the ways that some communities are policed and others aren't. And my understanding of this and the way that I've always explained my position on this is that I do believe we need to get to a place where we're doing alternative forms of policing. I do believe that we need to be treating mental health calls, addiction calls, these sorts of issues in a different way, and the money in this budget that goes to creating alternative responses will start to set up an infrastructure to do that. And so I thank the advocates for this, and I understand that there's some disappointment that I do support this budget because they understand that this doesn't go nearly far enough in ensuring that we address the OT issues, that we address sort of these problems that have risen up, and I don't disagree with them. But I understand that with these budgets, you're making a choice as to whether or not something gets funded or something else doesn't, and how you move in that way. And so as we move forward and as we talk about what we want in future budgets, what I'm looking for is consistent allocations to alternative policing. I'm looking for us to talk about public safety and what that means and the distinctions and the differences between security and public safety, what it means to actually treat the root causes of crime. And the only way we're going to get there is by looking at that public safety budget and figuring out in what ways things that address public safety get handled. And if we're not willing to create an infrastructure, then the argument is always going to be there's no other alternative, we don't have something set up. And I understand that the way we're going to get there, and this is the next, I think, fight for the council in the future, is through this contract process. A lot of the things that are going to be discussed, a lot of the things that are hot button issues for how we move forward with police reform require contract negotiations and contracts that reflect those changes. And so I'm avidly watching that. I'll be very much watching that. And I just want to add that when we're adding folks, we've heard over and over again, I think there were at least 3 hearings, possibly 2, on BPS overtime with this budget, in relation to this budget, and we've heard over and over again that we need more officers, we need more officers. That's where the BPD overtime comes. So imagine my surprise when I look up the Public Safety Strategies Group study in 2015, the audit of BPD, that stated specifically that that didn't seem to check out, because when they added more officers to these units, we got higher overtimes. And so they couldn't figure out in that audit why the addition of more officers to a unit, which was supposedly going to lower overtime needs, created more overtime cost. And so those are the kinds of things that I hope we move forward with. I think there's supposed to be a study being commissioned or some work being commissioned on staffing and how we come about those things. So that's on that. I just want to touch the capital budget really quickly. As a district councilor, the capital budget means a lot to me. This year's capital budget meant a whole lot to me. We just went through a pandemic that devastated my neighborhoods. I represent Rosendale, Mattapan, Hyde Park, and we lost a lot of residents. People lost family members. And one of the things that became very apparent is that Hyde Park had a real issue with access to health. And my maiden speech last year was on racism as a public health crisis, and the reason that was an easy thing to do is because the Boston Public Health Commission had already said that there's 20-something odd factors that factor into one person's health, and racism impacted every single one of those in a negative way. One of those ways is access to health care. And in my district, which is 75% people of color, this is the first community health center in Hyde Park that we have, and there's funding in this capital budget to bring that to fruition. That's going to touch real people's lives. Those are the kinds of things that I'm balancing, that I'm thinking of. And finally, I just want to talk about the education budget, because I'll be voting yes on that as well. And I think it'll probably be pulled out later, but it came up earlier today about the exam schools and sort of the task force recommendations. And I've been disturbed reading the reports from the press that the education budget may have been being held hostage for a more inequitable response to that problem. And what I would say to folks is, when we talk about racism as a public health crisis, or Black Lives Mattering, or systemic oppression, systemic racism, one of the things that has frustrated me when we do that is we take faces off of it. So when we talk about systems, this is the system. We are the system. This is the system. And so when we are operating in ways, and I hope it's not true, where we are saying that an education budget that is creating social workers and family liaisons for every school, that is trying to fund things that we desperately need coming out of a pandemic and a full year out of school up until about May for our students, at resources they desperately need. If we are saying we need to hold that up on behalf of creating a more inequitable, or in holding back an equitable entrance to our exam schools, that is systemic oppression. That is how systems sustain and uphold those things. And so I desperately hope that that is not something that this body has engaged in. I desperately hope that we're not having a conversation, whether it's behind closed doors or in public, about whether or not we're going to give our children, most of them under the poverty line, most of them people of color, the resources that they desperately need. And if we don't do that, then we're gonna deal with how they get into the exam schools in a different way. I'm certainly hopeful that that is not the case. I would say that that does not reflect this body as I know it. That does not reflect the folks that I think really do care about our residents in the city of Boston. And so those reports were troubling to me. And I just want to say that I am a yes on this education budget for those reasons. And I'm also a yes on changing how we go about entrances into exam schools, because creating access and opportunity for our children that is equitable and is based in fairness and justice is always the right thing to do. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the body, and thank you, Councilor Bok, for your work.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. The chair recognizes the at-large councilor from Roslindale, Councilor Michelle Wu. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I will echo and make sure that I start in the right place, which is thanks to colleagues, of course, and all the administration officials who have come before this council, and of course our birthday chair, who has spent so much energy, effort, leadership capacity and capital, making sure that the conversations were headed in a collaborative and productive way. I'm very grateful that the conversations this year, the actions and the level of intensity on pushing for something more from the council have grown compared to last year. I am always trying to balance our role as city councilors, as the legislative body and the fiscal stewards of the city, of how we strike that right balance between ensuring financial stability for the city and that we are making responsible decisions, while also taking up our role as having the oversight and accountability responsibility of calling out when things are falling short and when we are not meeting the moment. For me, this budget, like last year's budget, does not meet the moment. It is a collection of smaller categories with seed funding in different places that checks boxes on a lot of very important categories and topics and issues and the beginnings of solutions. And I'm glad that we're moving towards identifying these and having it on the table. But in a moment when we need vision, and we need most of all to ensure that we can deliver on that, I can't support checking the box on small initiatives without the plans to deliver that and without the connections and the intersectional vision to be able to ensure that this fits together. And so for me, I just want to give voice to so many who spoke out last year and reached out to this council in a moment of historic activism and pushed and called and emailed and showed up. I do not believe that that feeling and that belief that we could do more and we could be aiming for where our city should be headed, I don't believe that has diminished. I know people are tired. I know we are now a year later, and last year's interaction with the council felt very demoralizing. And so I also want to just highlight that when it comes to a transformational approach to our housing crisis, when it comes to real reforms to our police department, when it comes to the types of investments at the scale that we need to see and how interconnected they should be between departments and between initiatives, that I am standing as a no vote on the operating budget for that reason. I want to also, I'll just take this time to address the school's budget as well, right? The way that our system is set up, we go deep on one department, one very important department, of course, but differently from the rest of our budget. And as a BPS mom, as someone who has lived and seen what our students and families and educators and the district has gone through over this last year, these next moments are very dire. And so while I take great issue as well with the scope and the scale of what we're reaching for within the school department, for me, the decision of whether or not we will onboard very critical supports to get the holes plugged, to get our families reconnected, to provide that kind of healing and the baselines of support that we need, we can't, my view is that I will not contribute to putting that at jeopardy with the potential onboarding of new staff for social and emotional supports in these next few weeks to be ready for the school year. And then I just want to offer a word on, again, I'm so grateful to this body and the incredible amount of work that has happened with conversations, adding to a supplemental budget. We need to get to a place where we are addressing the underlying challenges, and this is a one-time set of funds that I'm glad we're discussing. We should be discussing in more detail and with greater commitments and accountability. And for me, it doesn't solve the underlying concerns with the existing budget to just say we've now secured additional commitments on top of that. When we continue to see an overtime, police department overtime line item cut that does not have plans for how that will come about, and we continue to see concerns about the scale of the investments, to use our one-time funding in this way to address this, for me, was not enough. And so I just want to express gratitude to this body and be clear that I will be a no on the operating budget, a yes on the school's budget, a yes on the capital budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Wu. The chair recognizes the District Councilor from Mattapan, Councilor Andrea Campbell. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I too want to echo gratitude, or start with gratitude. Take a deep breath. Shift the energy in the room. Thank you. So I want to thank Councilor Bok for your leadership, of course, for shepherding us through this process. I also want to thank Central staff who worked incredibly hard as well. I want to thank my Chief of Staff, I can't look at you, who has been fighting the fight, even though there have been at moments very political layers. And she's carried herself with grace, class, to do the job and get the work done. So thank you. I also want to thank, of course, not just my Chief of Staff, the rest of my team as well, but Ellie, you took the lead, so thank you. I, of course, want to thank the administration, the budget office, Justin and his team, IGR, everyone for working really hard with us to try to get us to a good place. I also want to thank the residents and the advocates and all the folks who showed up, not just last year, but all the folks who showed up this year, who called us, who emailed us, who texted us, who exercised their civic duty by attempting, of course, to engage in the process and to hope that this budget would respond and reflect what they were demanding of us. I want to thank them, because last year was a very difficult year for many, of course, but for those in the brown and black community who experienced George Floyd, there was an additional layer there. And I constantly heard that this particular budget cycle, how the trauma still exists for them. So I want to thank them for continuing to come back to push for a whole host of systemic inequities, particularly around policing reform. I also want to stress, and I stressed this at the last council meeting, that I've been consistent. For 2 years, I voted against the BPS budget. In 1 year, I stood up there by myself, and I was the only no vote against the Boston Public Schools budget, because I did not think it went far enough to close the systemic inequities that exist within BPS and to guarantee every family in the city of Boston access to an excellent education, which I also shared is near and dear to me. I often say, but for the grace of God and the BPS education I got at 5 BPS schools, all of which were excellent, I would not have been successful, and I definitely wouldn't be standing in this role. The second year, I voted against BPS for the same reasons. This year, I'm voting against BPS for the same reasons. Last year, I voted against the operating budget. This year, I'm voting against the operating budget for the same reasons, actually maybe for some additional reasons. And so I want to make it clear that this isn't political. I know folks in the media space and others will try to frame it as such. It isn't. For me, this is about doing the job and making sure that you're standing up, most importantly, for those who are unseen, unheard, and who do not feel as though their voice is given the weight it deserves in these processes, and that their budget reflects what they're demanding of us. Someone remarked that it's easy to vote no. It actually isn't. If it were, we would have a 1/12 budget a long time ago. It's very difficult, actually, to vote no. I think it's actually easy to vote yes, because when you vote yes, you can say that we're making progress, that systemic reform is soon to be accomplished. I can't wait. Thousands of Bostonians cannot wait. I stressed this last year. For generations in this city, people have been waiting for systemic reform, for greater access to opportunity, greater access to excellent schools, greater access to good housing. There are neighborhoods, including in my current district, that have been under-resourced and under-invested in for generations. And they have been demanding that a budget respond appropriately. So similar to them, I say, I can't wait for systemic reform. I cannot wait for police reform. If not in the moment and after George Floyd, then when? When do we push for a department to become more transparent, more accountable, for a budget to be reined in, because even the department itself agrees it is not sustainable? And it isn't. It's a $400 million budget with a $70 million overtime budget that keeps going up. I don't think that we should wait for the next elected mayor to address that, or to address our Boston public schools, or to address the public health crisis we're seeing at Mass and Cass. I also want to say that I don't think the families that are in touch with us around various school infrastructure, and I'll name one, the Sarah Greenwood School in my district, they have been pushing for a swing space. This is a school that still has asbestos in it, doesn't have adequate play space. No family, none of us, would send our children there. These families are demanding better infrastructure there. I don't think that they should have to wait. I don't think that folks who are dealing with the crisis down at Mass and Cass, and I refer to it as that because that is the area where it's concentrated, should have to wait, or wait for a commitment to meet with the acting mayor and the administration for their ideas to be implemented in response to the public health crisis we're seeing. I don't think I should have to wait as a mother of two boys to have a 5% chance of getting into a high-quality Boston public school, compared to certain downtown neighborhoods where it's 80%. I don't think any of us should have to wait for systemic reform. So when I vote no, that's what that message is from me. It's saying we shouldn't have to wait. It's our job in this body, in this system, to make bold changes and to push for a budget. That's the main vehicle we have as counselors, to push for a budget that will respond to those needs, respond to those demands, and meet those needs adequately. Last year, I, along with many colleagues on this council, including our acting mayor, voted against the budget because it didn't go far enough to reduce and reallocate the police budget, or propose a real plan to rein in the overtime spending. This year, the council is actually being asked to consider a budget that isn't much different, that provides actually no strategy to actualize promised reductions in overtime. Obviously, our chair has agreed to that. And I remain wholly unconvinced that the city will be able to actualize their promised $21 million overtime reduction by adding officers to the department, especially when this problem is clearly systemic and demands much deeper change. And this is not to suggest our officers are not working hard, they are, or that the civilians in that department are not working hard. This is about departmental reform. And a whole host of officers, captains, previous captains, have put forth thoughtful ideas for this department to try to actually implement to rein in these costs, including restructuring the department, restructuring certain units to send them back to the district to allow greater coverage for the calls that we all see and get with respect to police incidents. All of that was never tried in over a year. There is a clinging on to the status quo within this police department. That's the problem. It needs a cultural shift. And it actually needs it more now than ever before because of the cases that continue to come out of this department. It's abundantly clear that we need greater transparency and accountability, that we need to rein this budget in. If the Patrick Rose case, which clearly there will be more facts that come out about that case, which are beyond disturbing, don't push us to push for greater transparency and accountability, then win. I had a conversation with one of our union leaders who called me to personally apologize for attacking me personally. You know what he said to me? I thought he was on desk duty because I thought it was a domestic violence case. This is what we're dealing with in the police department. We have officers on desk duty where other officers say, I thought it was because it was domestic violence. Everyone agrees, including officers within the department, that there needs to be a cultural shift. And the only way we have that happen is if we work together in partnership. And the only way that happens is if a mayor exercises that leadership to get it done. And that is through this budget. That is through real reforms, real policy and cultural changes to back it up. And I refuse to say that we have to wait until the next budget cycle to deal with those issues which continue to actually get worse and are actually worse now than they were last year. This is our job to push this system to do better. And I know we don't have a whole bunch of tools in our toolkit. We'll have some more once this ballot initiative passes, but this is our tool to do it. In addition, mass and CAS. And I refer to as mass and CAS not to discount the humanity of folks who are dealing with opioid crisis and substance use disorder or homelessness. I refer to it because that's where it's concentrated. This is an issue that keeps me up at night because I, like many other folks on this body, including members of the task force, also are receiving the calls, the emails, the texts with the growing crisis that continues to get worse. And yes, I know there are additional investments to respond with case management, to do some more at the comfort station. That is not enough. We need a real plan. We need less of defensiveness and a willingness to collaborate. I have sent correspondence, have put ideas on the table, informed by people who've been doing the work, saying that we need a mass and CAS chief, a public health professional to help with the issues down there. We need a responder unit, everyone working together, preferably the same folks working together. Decentralization of services, people are talking about it. We can actually make it happen if there's a coordinated effort. I have yet to receive any response from the administration to any of that correspondence, absolutely zero. We even got creative and said, let's do a 30-day challenge. That was an idea from a constituent. And one of the requests is if they could meet with our acting mayor. That did not happen. And so continuing to push with what we're dealing with at Mass and CAS, and that is one big reason I remain a no on this budget. And again, a crisis I do not think that we should have to wait for the next elected mayor to deal with. This is growing every single day, even as we sit in this chamber. It is getting worse. And I heard there might be an emergency meeting this morning, I learned from someone outside the system, to try to address that. No collaboration with us in here. Task force, I don't even think meets anymore. There are members of the task force that call me who are just beyond devastated that there's not more collaboration to create impactful solutions to respond. I know our city employees are working hard. I know advocates are working hard. They are overwhelmed. Again, this is where leadership matters. This is also where budget matters. And this is where we can speak up and say, until we get an adequate response from the administration on how they're going to deal with this crisis, we're not going to accept this budget. Because when we do, then the conversation ends. And that's what happened last year. Everyone said we're going to work together. We're going to work on policing reform. We're going to work to rein in that cost. We're going to work to actualize the $12 million that the previous administration admitted that they were going to try to rein in. We realized zero of that. And there has been no movement whatsoever on any of these issues. The same will happen with Mass and CAS if we vote in favor of this budget, because I think that's easier to do. And I'll just end by saying Boston Public Schools continue to get calls and emails about the status of BPS. We lost about 2,000 families. It's the sharpest decline in the last 15 years. And this isn't because families families are not happy with this system. I do not think this budget adequately addresses the inequities in terms of access. I do not think this budget adequately addresses the issues we're seeing with our special needs students or English learners. I do not think this budget adequately addresses what we're going to do over the summer. And we're giving them $400 million to figure it out and expecting them to come back with a real plan. That's unacceptable. And it definitely doesn't invest in infrastructure. Parents they're beyond frustrated, and I share that frustration, and I think I'm delivering a little bit of that now for them. They are beyond frustrated. The Sarah Greenwood School I lift up as a great example of this frustration. At the very beginning of COVID, before we knew much about the virus, these families were pushing for a swing space. Over a year later, they still don't have a swing space. Instead, what they're getting is a conversation about ways in which to improve the building itself, piecemeal responses, not systemic, not adequate. And we've been told that there's a plan coming. We've been told that there's a plan coming in terms of looking at our infrastructure as a whole. In our most recent budget session, there's a timeline, we're working on it. Well, when do we get it? We've had over a year. So that frustration exists amongst families. And I think we need to reflect that when saying no to this budget. I know I am, because I'm speaking for those families that do not feel as though they're being represented. And then I'll end with saying, when I first joined the council, I voted yes on a few different budgets. I got calls from the mayor and the administration, worked with the administration to create the Youth Development Fund, worked with Councilor Flaherty and the administration on the CPA, really got some meaningful things done with the previous mayor. But then at one point I said, wait a minute. At what point do we use the power we have in this body to say that business as usual isn't working anymore? The inequities in the city of Boston that so many residents are dealing with are actually getting worse, not better. How does this budget respond? How does this budget respond to the lack of transparency and accountability with our police department? How does this budget respond to the overtime and the fraud within our police department? How does this budget respond and protect our tax-paying dollars? How does this budget respond to the crisis at Mass and Cass? How does this budget respond to closing the systemic inequities that don't just affect low-income people and people of color? That affects the entire city of Boston. It holds us all back from reaching our full potential and our promise as a city. And the only way I think that we really get some movement is if we stand up and say no. Because respectfully, Mr. President, I do not think it's easy to do yes. I tried to get there. I really did. I worked with Councilor Bok, and even she admitted, at least on the policing reform, which I appreciated, it wasn't there. Mass and Cass, I know others remain frustrated, so I'm going to keep working. I appreciate the indulgence. I appreciate you letting me go on a little bit longer. And I hope those who exercised their civic duty over the last year, who texted, called, emailed in the thousands, I want them to know that I heard them loud and clear. And that when you exercise your civic duty, this government should respond. And right now, we're not responding, so I can't even imagine what they're feeling. So I hear them. My vote is a no, because I hear them loud and clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Campbell. I believe this will be the last comment on the operating budget. The chair recognizes. The chair recognizes Councilor Lydia Edwards.
Sorry, if I can wait for the school budget to respond.
Okay, fair enough. Then withdrawn. And I apologize. The chair recognizes the district council from Alston Brighton, Councilor Liz Braden. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to all the great work of our Chair of Ways and Means and all the central staff and everyone. This has been an incredibly intense and long process, but over the last 8 weeks or 6 weeks, I really appreciate all the great work. The budget, the operating budget is one of the ways that we can try and move some of the pieces in making progress for many of our young people. I will address the school budget separately, but I really feel that the investment in youth jobs, the investment in our childcare entrepreneurs, the investment in our Office of Immigrant Advancements will pay dividends over time to help our youth achieve better success in the job market. I feel very strongly that in this moment, with all this new industry coming into our city, that we need to be really bold and aggressive in preparing our young people in our BPS schools and young adults to prepare them to get those jobs in the biotech industry. They may not be going to a 4-year college, but they can get good paying jobs in this new industry if we prepare them and we give them the tools to to get those jobs, and it will I really truly believe it will have an impact on our the wealth gap, the racial wealth gap in our city. It will help lay a foundation, and those jobs are the first step on the ladder that will help those young people advance, and they can go on with support from their employers into second and third level education to achieve even better credentials to work in these spaces. That's notwithstanding the responsibility of our school system to adequately prepare them for that. So the green jobs and the youth jobs training, I really feel we're having this incredible heat wave in the end of June. Our friends out in Portland are seeing temperatures of 117 degrees today and yesterday. You know, green jobs and developing our green infrastructure, and building our more energy efficient houses, energy efficient buildings are jobs to take care of our stormwater infrastructure and to develop and maintain our urban tree canopy are all critical tools that we have to utilize to try and help address and mitigate the impacts of climate change. One issue for me, really, and I say this every time I stand up almost, is that we have a community centre in Alston Brighton. It's the only community centre in our community of 70,000 people. It's a cooling centre for our seniors and our families in a heat emergency. And we need to, it will close next July. It will close, the doors will close, and we won't have a community centre. And it's really important to me that in this process, in this budget process, and the ongoing conversations that we're going to have in the next year, that we will prioritise places like our community centres and HVAC in our schools, so that we will have places of shelter for our young people, for our elders, for our kids, so that in a heat emergency that there will be somewhere for them to go. And I think, you know, it used to be that there was 5 90-degree plus days in a year. We've had more than, I think, 9, and it's only June so far. So this is the trend. I don't see it reversing right now, but the whole issue of climate mitigation and climate readiness is critically important. And I know that our supplemental budget addresses some of that. But again, these are critically important issues, and I am proud to support the operating budget in an attempt to try and address some of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Braden. So, Councillor Bok, Chair of the Committee on Ways and Means, seeks passage of docket 0801. This is the operating budget only. We will have subsequent votes after this vote. So on the operating budget, docket 0801, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Thank you. Docket 0801, Councillor Arroyo.
Yes.
Councillor Arroyo, yes. Councillor Baker.
Aye.
Councillor Baker, aye. Councillor Bok.
Aye.
Councillor Bok, aye. Councillor Braden.
Aye.
Councillor Braden, aye. Councillor Campbell.
No.
Councillor Campbell, no. Councillor Edwards.
Yes.
Councillor Edwards, yes. Councillor Sabi George.
Yes.
Councillor Sabi George, yes. Councillor Flaherty.
Yes.
Councillor Flaherty, yes. Councillor Flynn.
Yes.
Councillor Flynn, yes. Councillor Mejia.
C.
Councillor Mejia, C. Councillor O'Malley.
Yes.
Councillor O'Malley, yes. And Councillor Wu.
No.
Councillor Wu, no. Mr. President, docket 0801 has passed with a supermajority.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Clerk, would you now please read docket 0802, which is the Boston Public Schools proposed budget.
Thank you. Docket 0802, message in order for the annual appropriation for the school department for FY 2022.
Thank you very much. The Chair recognizes the Chair of the Committee on Ways and Means, Councillor Kenzie Bok. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. And again, I do have a committee report to be distributed. So this docket, some councilors have spoken to it already, but it is the annual operating budget appropriation for BPS. And, you know, to me, there are 2 really critical things in this docket that are the reason why we do need to act on it today, and why I'm urging the body to pass this. as folks know, the previous Walsh administration made a 3-year, $100 million commitment to sort of new funds in BPS, and so there's about a third of that each year. And this year, that third, so let's say 35 million-ish, is being dedicated really to two main things. One is putting a social worker and family liaison in every school. Councilor Asabi George alluded to this, but with her advocacy and others, the supplemental order that was referenced earlier does include funding to get us to having that be a full-time person in every school, which is a distinction versus one in every school. But the budget, $16.9 million of that new money, which is of course the thing that we lose if we don't pass a school budget and go to a 112, is for hiring those folks. And I think we all know that our students and families have had an incredibly hard year, and that we want these supports ready to receive folks when they show up in September. And as I think Councilor Wu alluded to, don't want to risk those. The other thing is $18.5 million that's basically gap filler for the fact that because of the enrollment declines that Councilor Campbell alluded to, our schools, I think about 75 of our 125 schools would be seeing significant budget cuts were it not for this $18.5 million in gap filler to basically buffer them against the enrollment decline. And I think that none of us wants to be in the world where students are coming back to school. We're trying to, again, have communities where people can heal and grow and learn again. And instead, you're seeing these intense budget cuts across the board. And so that was an early step that the administration took in their BPS budget proposal that I think councilors agree is important. I do want to say that, there are three things that really alarmed me over the course of our BPS budget conversations, I would say. I could probably think of more if I thought about it, but one of them is definitely, as I said, the situation of sort of trauma that our students are in, right? From this past year and a half, and in many cases that's compounded. And I used to think about that very much from the housing support side, and the BHA and BPS, as people know, has really partnered to think about how we better support our unhoused and housing insecure families. We think about the whole child is hurting right now, and that's one of the reasons why I think these supports are really important. Another thing that hasn't gotten enough attention, I think, in the press or from this council are the very alarming literacy numbers for our students in elementary, middle school, high school. I mean, BPS is therefore, with this budget, putting in some real upgrading and shifting of its literacy approaches. But I think that's completely core. We talk about 21st century jobs and roles and all of that stuff, but like literacy is the name of the game, and that was very concerning to me. A third thing is this enrollment decline, and I think, it's so important for every stakeholder in the city to understand that on the enrollment front, we have a crisis on our hands, and nobody can bury their head in the sand and say, the system we have works, and let's just make it work for the reduced number of children who are here because it becomes totally financially unsustainable. But it is so important that we all pull together to reverse that decline, right? Not to kind of accept it as the status quo. And to me, if we cut 75 of our schools' budgets by going to 112, that would, I fear, accelerate, not mitigate the enrollment decline that we're in. And that's one of the reasons I think it's something that the next mayor, elected mayor, has to have a really laser focus on, and every stakeholder in the system, even folks who might think that aspects of the status quo sort of work well enough, like everyone's going to need to come together around that. Because the most alarming number we saw about enrollment decline is that enrollment decline is highest in the lowest grades. And that means that when you think about the classes moving through, we're living with a reduced bubble. And so I just want to stress that there are real concerns, but we've got 53,000 kids who need to show up to well-supported classrooms in September. And they need the financial support on that from this body so that the people who are going to be there to meet them are hired. And so, I think that without reprising what I said before, that this is another nevertheless vote. And there are lots of things for this body, for the school committee to work on. If we don't use the ESSER funds, the $400 million that was alluded to in a serious moonshot way, transform our situation, and make BPS a system that people are flocking to instead of seeing these declines. Shame on all of us. But I think in this moment, a step that we have to take in order to take all those other steps we have to take is to pass the docket 0802 today. Madam Chair, I am recommending, as my committee report says, that dockets 0802 ought to pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Bok. Now we'll open up the floor for comment from other councilors, starting with President Pro Tem O'Malley. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I neglected my first round, so I've used this opportunity to also thank Chantel, Caitlin, and Neil, who have done exceptional work. Thank you. As it relates to the BPS budget, I wanted to begin by, of course, thanking the Ways and Means Chair, but also the Education Committee Chair, Councilor Nisa Saibi-George, who as a teacher, as an alumna, as a BPS parent, has always shown tremendous leadership, and I'm grateful. And I will be joining you in voting in support of this BPS budget. Now, in my time on this body, I voted for BPS budgets, and I voted against a BPS budget. If this were not a time in our city, in our world, where we are coming out of a pandemic, I would likely be voting against this. But I cannot, in good conscience, vote against a budget that does offer supports to our BPS families who have had such an incredibly difficult and trying year. Learning loss unimaginably so. We were all together in March of 2020 making the tough decision to close schools, and I remember then, to his credit, Mayor Walsh said, we had said, well, what if we do it for 2 weeks? What if we do it for a month? And Mayor Walsh said, if we close them now, we're not opening for over a year. And he was probably, didn't want to be right, but he was. So there are some supports in this budget, but the reason why I would, in another year, perhaps not look as favorably, was alluded to by Councillor Bok. In my 11 years on this body, the city's population has grown dramatically. We're probably at 150,000 more Bostonians that call our great city home now than in 2010. And in that time, the student enrollment in Boston Public Schools has decreased precipitously. And that's a problem. I voted for budgets in the past because I thought that with these extra supports, we might see some things turned around. And I remain hopeful that that will be the case. That's how we will get there, and that's why I will be supporting this. But make no mistake about it, when it talks about concern, there are many, and the dwindling, declining enrollment is certainly one. The superintendent is a good person, and she is trying her best, but more needs to be done. Central office has some very good people there, very good friends of mine. It keeps growing and growing. I make the joke that really isn't a joke, that every year during the BPS budget hearings we see more and more people, wonderful people, but we don't see that money that should be instead allocated directly to the classrooms, directly to programming. So I'm hopeful that we will get there, and this is another leap of faith on my part that we're going to support this budget. I hope pass this budget, and I hope really be able to drill down to be able to offer quality, strong, excellent education to everyone across the city of Boston. Now, it's been mentioned earlier also, concern about the exam school admission process. I have said very publicly, very proudly from this chamber, from Zooms when we've had our hearings and working sessions, that this debate cannot be excellence versus equity or access. Those two notions are not in conflict with one another. And we have to do the hard work to recognize and strive for both, because that's what the children of this city deserve. And I am hopeful, and I will end my remarks with this, that the energy around the 6,000 students at the John D. O'Brien, at the Boston Latin Academy, and the Boston Latin School, we take that same energy to the 50,000 other students. And we talk about non-exam high schools as well, and how we are going to truly build a world-class educational system here in the city of Boston. Again, I can't in good conscience vote against a budget when there are so many unknowns and there has been such strain on BPS families, many of whom are in this chamber, that I'm proud to call you colleagues. I'm not a BPS family yet, but hope to be someday. I'm a BPS alum, as many of you know. This is about doing what's right for the city, and that's passing this budget. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, President O'Malley. Next up, Councillor Michael Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our Boston Public Schools have endured an extremely difficult and tumultuous year. This budget doesn't solve every single issue, but it will be an education budget that I will be supporting. There's been tremendous learning loss this year, and it's important to note over the last 7 years, and in the face of declining enrollment, the city's allocation to fund our schools has increased by $358 million. Think about that, $358 million of an increase. That's a proposed spending close to $25,000 per pupil in this fiscal year. There is still much work ahead of us to provide students with the education and opportunities that they deserve, but I am not willing to walk away from those past investments that I participated in and fought for, and especially in light of the situation that we're finding ourselves in coming out of the pandemic, and at a time when our kids and our BPS families need us the most. This year's budget funds 95 new full-time employees for social and emotional well-being professionals, as well as 80 full-time employees for multilingual family liaisons. A no vote will make these positions extremely difficult to fund. And we've been fighting for that funding. All of us, we've been in this chamber in prior budgets fighting for more social and emotional well-being professionals, as well as more multilingual family liaisons. And that's important. It's been important work that we provide students and families with these supports, especially, again, after the year that they've had with such tremendous learning loss, as well as coming out of the pandemic, having been sick themselves, and or having lost a loved one. You always hear me say this. We boast of having the best colleges and universities in the world, Harvard too. And we need to continue to be as boastful about all of our Boston public schools, not just some of our Boston public schools. I steadfastly believe we need to accelerate funding into workforce development and training in our schools. We ought to be bragging about having the best voc tech in the state, if not the country, given our natural strengths of our colleges, our universities, our hospitals, all of our industries that call Boston their home, CEOs that are bringing their companies here. We need to match the curriculum in our Boston public schools, as our colleague, Councilor Liz Braden, had just alluded to, sort of the existing and the future economy, and whether it's through the Green Job program or just the labor force demands that we're seeing in the South Boston waterfront, and we're hoping will trickle through Ed Nye's neighborhood, but through every neighborhood of the city of Boston. I believe we need to strengthen our commitment to ESL and IEP students and work to ensure that a lion's share of our funding goes directly to our students in the classroom for educational services, facility upgrades, and resources that they need to be successful. We have a responsibility to close the achievement gap, the opportunity gap, the wealth and the health gaps. And it starts with our kids, and it starts with our BPS families, and it starts with the resources that are in this budget. And also resources that are going to be coming down the pike through the federal COVID relief funds, which I will be chairing on behalf of this body, and will be working extremely close with all of you and the administration to address the highest needs. So I'll be voting in support of the education budget, and will also echo previous comments in terms of the work that our colleague and Chia did in addressing some of these critical needs, and her committee report, which she worked extremely hard on in partnership with the administration. There's a lot of good stuff here, folks. There's a lot of good stuff here, and there's stuff that was added, obviously, in the resubmission. And as I referenced, would we all love to have more? Of course we would. But given my role here and my tenure here and what I've fought for in the past, and seeing the increases that we've been able to get over the years, I'm not about to walk away from that. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Councilor Flaherty. The chair recognizes the at-large councilor from Dorchester, Councilor Julia Mejia. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Up until last night, I hadn't planned to give a speech only just on the operating budget and just call it a day. But after what I saw go down during last night's exam task force meeting, I think we all need to stand up and call out what happened. At the last minute, a few political forces in our city decided to change the work of the task force. That ultimately makes it harder for Black and brown students to get access to these coveted exam schools. What we're seeing with this process is nothing new. I came to Boston at the height of the busing era, and Lord knows we're still feeling the traumatic impact of that. I know what it feels like to be told that you're not welcomed in certain schools or that you do not belong. And here we are, 40 years later, and there are little children in our city who are being told the same thing through our actions. Part of why we're in this seat today is because no child should feel the pain and the impact of a system that is actively designed to keep us apart. Enough is enough. How much longer are we going to allow political interest to come at the cost of our children's education? How much longer are we going to allow our schools to be segregated? When is this us versus them narrative going to stop? Sonny Pie put it best when he said this earlier today. This always happens in code. We don't want to send the wrong message, quote unquote, fearing backlash, fearing a mess. At some point, things need to change. What happened last night confirms what so many advocates, parents, students, and teachers have been saying for a long time. We need an elected school committee. We can't keep doing the same thing and expecting different results. So much of this BPS budget is going towards the things that to try to repair the harm of decades of systemic racism. We're getting ethnic studies, we're getting more funding for special education, we're getting more money for ELL students, we're getting funding for community hub schools through BTU, and so much more. And to put them at risk for political gain is dangerous. I support this budget, and I will continue to push alongside community leaders like Lisa Green, Lisa Jean Graff, Sonny Pie, Mr. Kamani James, and so many more for equitable Boston Public Schools. You know, we have some young people here today. And in the spirit of always making sure that we uplift their voices because they are always unseen and unheard, just want to uplift what Mr. Kamani James has shared with me is that so many young people have lost faith in us. They come here and they watch the theatrics, they watch who shows up and how they show up. And we need to do better because they're watching us. And if we're really serious about the work, then we need to show up ready to do the work, even when it's hard to do. So, I think if we are really going to move this city forward, we're all going to have to learn to put our egos and our political agendas to the side and do the work. Because if we don't, we're going to continue to be in constant conflict with each other. And while it's pretty to say we're here to collaborate, I have to say that the political will and courage for that collaboration always gets compromised. And I think that that's why so many people have given up in politics, because there's too many politicians in these seats. And we don't need any more politics as usual. What we need is for people to stand up and do what is right when the time calls for it. And so I think as we continue to move through these conversations, even when my voice quivers, even when I'm nervous, regardless of how of a political threat it may be for me to speak my truth, I'm going to do it because that's what I was hired to do. And so I want my colleagues to know that it's not just about holding ourselves accountable, but it's recognizing that if we're really serious about this work, we can't show up the way that we do and expect people to believe in us. So I am in full support of the BPS budget because, again, I'm waiting for after the elections, because whoever sits in that seat next year, trust that I will be coming for every single one of y'all. And that's not a threat. That is just a word of advice that I will be holding whoever is in that seat accountable to the people who put us in office. Period.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. The chair recognizes the District Councilor from East Boston, Councilor Lydia Edwards. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I rise again to reiterate that we are talking about systemic oppression when we're talking about our education system, 100%. We are talking about that. And when we talk about that, we need to acknowledge our hands make the system. So therefore, our hands need to unmake those oppressions and acknowledge when we are helping to advance them and lift each other up when we're helping to dismantle them. That's it. That's the point of us going back and forth, but that's also the point of how, in this system, we hold BPS accountable. We have one vote, and that is on their budget. So that, to me, is a form of accountability. Whatever brings you to that point, for me, for example, with East Boston High School, it was the defunding of my high school that brought me to the point that I said I cannot support the system that does that. For whoever reason that they felt that they needed to push for whatever systemic issue that they had, the one time and the one way in which we speak with BPS, this body, is a vote on the budget. So I want to make that clear to anybody else, whatever rumors may be out there, that's how we speak. Now, if you want to talk about systemic oppression, then you can talk to me about an unelected task force making recommendations to an unelected school committee where the one student voice doesn't even have a vote. That is systemic oppression. And I completely agree with my colleague that we absolutely need at least a hybrid or an elected school committee for that reason. But I am not going to sit here and have folks be confused that when we speak and we leverage our vote for funding, it is a way of holding that system accountable because we only have one way, for now. For now. And again, this body unanimously, and again, thank you each and every single one of you, unanimously said, we can do better, but it isn't for us to make that decision. The democratic way, the best way for us to decide how the system goes is to put it to the voters. Again, we're waiting on that language and hoping that when it comes down from the Attorney General, we can put it to the voters, and we do have a touch in the school budget with that reform. It is not as heavy as direct with the operating budget, but I wanted to remind people of that. And I want to thank you all for supporting that, genuinely and honestly. But again, accountability with one budget vote inevitably puts us in a situation where sometimes we are holding institutions that are systemically oppressive hostage, and I'm okay with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor Edwards. The chair now recognizes the District Council from Dorchester, Councilor Baker. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, if I can ask the chair, are we voting for the good vibe? Are we voting for the social ills? Do we know how we're voting today? Well, I'll get that question later. So 9 years ago, I filed legislation for a hybrid school committee. 7 years ago, I filed legislation to just get confirmation on school committee appointments. Both of those were, they weren't very looked upon favorably by the administrations of the time. I think that's something that we need to start looking at a little more forcefully, maybe this next term coming up. Some of the revelations that have happened around the school committee concern me. Some of the situations that I've heard in particular schools concern me, especially around some of the talk around the school police concern me. I have no assurances what's going to happen with those school police as far as I'm concerned. They may all be put out of work. I don't know. I'm being told no. And today is actually my 11th anniversary of being laid off from the print department. June 30th, 11 years ago, last day of my job, in the job for 25 years. So I'm watching those men and women of the Boston, the police school union, be treated the way I was treated 11 years ago. No support from people above them, everybody just selling them out. I'm not comfortable with that. My vote isn't based on an entrance exam, whether there's not an exam. I have an issue with the fact that 90% of the oxygen in the room, not this room, all the rooms in the whole city have been eaten up by Latin Academy and O'Brien. Meanwhile, our 3rd, 4th, 5th graders are all suffering. We're going to pass everybody on to their next grade this year. What about last year? I mean, I almost think that we should keep everyone back a year and just start over. Excuse me for a second there. My children went to public schools to the 5th grade. They are the students they are now because of programs that they were in at the Murphy School in Dorchester, Advanced Work. Advanced Work's being taken. I don't know if it's even in any schools anymore. They're the students they are because of that. So why are we looking at what we can get rid of instead of building up that 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade? Not even talking about a task force. They're not asking us how we should spend $400 million. We're going to have a task force that nobody's accountable to tell the school committee that nobody's accountable to how they're going to spend the money. The Secretary of Education is highly concerned that we're getting $400 million. I'm with them. Now, my department, the print department, was closed over $1 million. $1 million, 40, 50 people put out of work. We could still be doing the printing now. That's not what it's about for me. I'm past that. That's an old trauma. But since my first budget, I think it was about $850 million. That adds about $40 million every year. And we aren't any better than we were 10 years ago. So because of efficiencies, we're spending $25K per student. And we're not putting out the best of the best. And again, I think the problem's at 3rd, 4th, and 5th. I'm not hearing very many discussions around that. I'm not hearing about how we're investing in low-performing schools. And we're pitting neighborhoods against each other. And quite frankly, the neighborhoods that look like me look like they're going to lose. My kids are almost done with school. So I want to vote for this budget, but I'm not sure we're spending our money wisely. I told you we were closed over $1 million. That's 40 printing departments a year for 10 years. So I'm a no on this budget here today. And a big part of it is because the police officers are there have no idea what they're doing tomorrow. Are they laid off? Are they coming into work? Are they police officers? If a fight happens, can I break it up? They don't know any of that stuff. And that's our munis too. They're not in the school. But that's what situation we have. People on June 30th thinking tomorrow what's going to happen. I was in that position. I tell you, Mr. President, not a good position to be in. Watch the teachers union advocate against workers, against police officers. A union. It's about work and working conditions and people being put to work. We watch the teachers union advocate against those police officers in there. I think that's wrong. And that seems to be the trajectory of the school department as a whole. And it concerns me. It concerns me about the city. Because if we're not educating our kids, we can't be a world-class city. Because it'll only be, well, thank you, Mr. President. And I will be voting no today. There was some comments on Twitter. We saw them. We know what past tense of Twitter is. So there you go. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. Any further discussion on docket 0802? Seeing none. I apologize, Councilor Arroyo. The chair recognizes the district councilor from Hyde Park, Councilor Ricardo Arroyo.
Thank you so much. I'm a product of BPS. I actually went to BPS. I actually gravitate to, I saw Councilor Wu had her child here today. I was that child. My father was on the school committee, which should be an elected school committee. I stand for an elected school committee. He was on the school committee, was the school committee president. And I remember being that child in that room. And the funny thing about being a child is when you're an adult, you forget that as a child, you seem to remember and think about things and see things perfectly fine. I remember hearing them talk about my art classes, my recess time, what was going to happen in the classrooms that I was in. And I vividly remember having those discussions about whether or not we deserve the funding for arts or enjoyment or any of those different things that would come in to teach a whole child. And then going to BPS, actually the Sarah Greenwood, which Councilor Campbell brought up, and seeing the impact of those conversations. So I got a very interesting education in my life of seeing where in rooms you make decisions that impact actual human beings. I was that human being. I remember seeing the advocacy, and then I remember seeing the result. And at 6, 7 years old, not a lot of folks had that experience, and it set me on the path that I'm on now. I also happen to have a GED, and depending on how you look at me and you look at my story, I'm either a success story for BPS or a failure. Depends on how you want to look at it. I tend to think about it in a very different way. I went through BPS, and I met teachers, some of them now constituents, who changed my life, who put me on a specific trajectory. My mother was a teacher for 30+ years. My sister is currently one. And I hold them in high regard because I understand what they're working with and what they're up against. And so when I think about the school budget, and I had to talk about family, so now I'm emotional. When I think about the school budget, I think about being that kid. And one of the things that people don't understand about my life is that when my parents had resources, they invested it in their kids. And so my other brothers went to St. Sebastian's, and I went to the Thatcher Montessori School in Milton for my early education. And I remember when we couldn't afford that anymore because my father had resigned as the Secretary of Education for the city and had decided to stay on the school committee. And so I remember that decision because it meant I went to public schools. And so in my first year, I went to public schools, and it was an immediate, we're not in Kansas anymore, and I knew for the rest of my life that there were children receiving resources that I had once received that I was no longer receiving. And I knew that the children around me had no real idea because they'd never lost that and they'd never experienced that. So I knew that there were two separate experiences. And so I carry that knowledge into the way that I try to move through this work. And when we talk about, I don't hear anybody talking about second, third graders, and we're only talking about the exam schools. Yeah, we are, because there's an inequitable process to getting into the exam schools. That's how this works. When there is a problem, we will discuss that problem. If that problem exists, and there's data, and there's facts, and there's just good things that we got to do, guess what? We deal with that. It's like if there's a leak in here and we don't talk about why is nobody talking about the bathroom on the 3rd floor. I'm going to deal with the leak in front of me. And so when we talk about exam schools and exam school admissions, and I went to one, my niece is currently in one, I understand that there's an inequitable process to that, and we know that standardized testing has a history of racial bias. We know that. We know that there is not an exam that exists that people of color or those lower on the socioeconomic spectrum or scale excel at beyond that of other folks. We heard today that this plan to create equity is going to impact communities that don't look like me, I guess. But the plans that exist right now certainly impact communities that look like me, and they have for decades. There is a reason we have a Racial Imbalance Act that has language in it that literally excluded our exam schools from that conversation. And I think it's really important that when we talk about exam schools and who gets in and who doesn't, part of that conversation is about who has resources and who doesn't. And part of the way that works for alumni and for people who have actual money getting back into these schools is that if you make it so that poor kids get in, you get less money in your donations later. And there is a financial interest to not changing that either. And I think we should speak to that as well. And so when we talk about this budget, I know that we have children in trauma. We had them already. I was one of those children in trauma. And so I know that there are children in trauma. I know that what just happened over the last year with the loss of parents, the loss of families, the loss of teachers and loved ones, we are having an exponential explosion on what that trauma might look like and what resources we need to address that. That is something I take deeply seriously as somebody who has experienced those traumas myself. And so when we talk about how we go about this budget and whether or not this budget is something that we would hold hostage to exam school recommendations or what systemic oppression looks like or doesn't look like, systemic oppression looks like what we've had. That's what it looks like. And continuing that is a continuation of systemic oppression. Efforts to reverse that, efforts to change that, are not a continuation of systemic oppression. And if we are going to hold back efforts to change that, efforts to make those changes, to continue the status quo or to slow down progress, then you are participating in systemic oppression. That's how that works. And so that's where I'm at on it. I'm passionate about it because these are our children. They don't get an extra year of education. It's 3rd grade this year, it's 4th grade next year. That's how the clock works. And so we need to bring those resources to bear now. This is not a time to play games with that. I am a yes on the education budget. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the district councilor from Alston Brighton, Councilor Liz Braden. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to echo, we all recognize that this past year has been an incredibly difficult year for our BPS community and our basically the global community. But here in Boston, we have schools in our district have lost parents, they've lost grandparents, they've lost teachers through COVID. And I had a listening session with some young people last spring, and we had young people, their parents both out working in essential worker jobs, and the older kids were trying to supervise, do their own schoolwork while supervising their younger siblings on Zoom classes, etc. It's been an incredibly difficult year. It's done untold damage. I don't know, we'll know in 10 years maybe we might have some perspective on how much damage this has done to our students and their progress. It's an unprecedented situation. So I also want to recognize the incredible work that our schools teachers have done in the midst of this pandemic, and the school staff, the folks who looked out for making sure that some of our most vulnerable students got their Chromebooks, got had food in their cupboards, had food deliveries organised. I know that there's an extensive effort in our community in Alston Brighton and across the city of people who were getting into the trenches and making sure that our most vulnerable families had food on the table and that they were getting the support that they needed in this incredible crisis that we've just been through. So I want to recognise the ongoing challenges that we have in our school system, but we need to turn our attention to rebuilding and recovering to ensure that every BPS student, no matter who they are, where they live, or where their family originates from, achieves their full potential in school and in their future life in our city and beyond. I fundamentally believe that if we invest in early education, if we identify those students who are struggling in 3rd, 4th and 5th grade, and if we really develop and put our focus on not just our exam schools, but on our comprehensive general admission high schools, that we can have the best urban school system in the country, and if not the world. This is Boston. We always say we're the first to do this, we're the first to do that. We're the best. We've got the best world-class universities, as Councillor Flaherty always reminds us. We are able to do this, but we have to really take the bull by the horns and make it happen. So, this budget won't fix it. I think this has to be a strategic plan that we unroll and keep pushing over future years. But I will be voting yes on the budget because I really feel that the important work of supporting our young people who have just come through this crisis and their families with social workers and family liaisons to help this battered school system recover from this pandemic. I think this is a critical moment, and what we do now today in voting affirmatively to support this school budget will definitely pay dividends going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Braden. Any further discussion on docket 0802? Seeing none. Chair Kenzie Bok, Chair of the Committee of Ways and Means, seeks passage of docket 0802, once again is the school committee, the Boston Public School Committee budget. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. President. Docket 0802, the school budget. Councillor Arroyo.
Yes.
Councillor Arroyo, yes. Councillor Baker.
Nay.
Councillor Baker, nay. Councillor Bok.
Aye.
Councillor Bok, aye. Councillor Braden.
Yes.
Councillor Braden, yes. Councillor Campbell.
No.
Councillor Campbell, no. Councillor Edwards.
Yes.
Councillor Edwards, yes. Councillor Asabi George.
Yes.
Councillor Asabi George, yes. Councillor Flaherty.
Yes.
Councillor Flaherty, yes. Councillor Flynn.
Yes.
Councillor Flynn, yes. Councillor Mejia. Councilor Mejia, C. Councilor O'Malley.
Yes.
Councilor O'Malley, yes, and Councilor Wu. Yes. Councilor Wu, yes. Mr. President, docket number 0802 has passed with the supermajority.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Clerk, would you now please read dockets 08 through 0803 through 0805, as well as dockets 0810, 0687, and 0725.
Certainly. Excuse me. Docket 0803, message and order approving the appropriation of $40 million to the other post-employment benefits known as OPEB Liability Trust Fund, established under Section 20 of the Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 32B. Docket 0804, message and order approving an appropriation of $12,600,000 from the City Capital Grant Fund in order to provide funding for various transportation and public road improvements. These projects are aligned with the goals of Go Boston 2030, the city's transportation master plan. The fund shall be credited to the Capital Grant Fund from the Parking Meter Fund. Docket 0805, message and order approving an appropriation of $2 million from the city's Capital Grant Fund to address the impact of transportation network services on municipal roads, bridges, and other transportation infrastructure, or any other public purpose substantially related to the operation of transportation network services in the city. Such funds will be transferred and credited to the Capital Grant Fund from revenue received from the Commonwealth Transportation Infrastructure Enhancement Trust Fund. Docket number 0810, message and order authorizing the City of Boston to accept an amount of $55 million in the form of a grant awarded by the United States Department of Treasury to be administered by the city's Boston's Chief Financial Officer / Collector Treasurer. This grant payment is made from the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, known as CLFRF, in the Treasury of the United States, established by Section 9901 of the American Rescue Act of 2021, known as ARPA. Docket 0687, message and order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and expend an amount of $50 million in the form of a grant awarded by the United States Department of Treasury to be administered by the City of Boston's Chief Financial Officer / Collector Treasurer. This grant payment is made from the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, CLFRF, in the Treasury of the United States, established by Section 9901 of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, known as ARPA. And docket number 0725, message and order approving an increase of the cost of living adjustment, known as COLA, base from $14,000 to $15,000 for all retiree beneficiaries of the Boston retirement system.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The chair recognizes the Chair of the Committee on Ways and Means, Councilor Kenzie Bok. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. And again, I have a committee report to distribute. This is a set of ancillary dockets that we wouldn't have been in a position to pass if we had not passed the operating budget, but we did. Thank you so much to councilors. And so therefore, I'm recommending all of them for passage. I want to just quickly run through what they are. So the first one, 0803, the Other Post-Employment Benefits Trust Fund. As I think councilors are aware of, we have two not fully funded long-term liabilities related to retirees from the City of Boston. One is the Pensions Fund, and as Councilor Baker alluded to earlier, we're actually on track to fully fund our pension liability by 2027. Which is something that has been the result of really hard fiscal stewardship by a number of folks across administrations. And when we get there, will represent a really substantial fiscal achievement for the City of Boston. And it's important to say that that's not just kind of like gobbledygook. It's like, do we have the money to pay our retirees what we have promised them? And that's just super important for the city to be able to uphold its end of the bargain. And to do so in a way that still enables us to fund our annual operating requirements for all the programs and departments that our residents count on. So we're on track to fully fund that by 2027. OPEB, Other Post-Employment Benefits, is mainly health care for retirees. And there also, we have a substantial unfunded liability for the city. And in this case, this one, because we did pensions first, the OPEB unfunded liability is much larger than what's currently unfunded on the pension side. And the commitment of this city has been for a long time that once we reach the 2027 mark on pensions, we will then move to paying down the OPEB unfunded liability at a similar scale to what we're currently doing with pensions. However, in the meantime, we want it to be clear actuarially and to those who look at our fiscal health that that's a commitment that we're making for the long term and that we're going to hold up that end of the bargain. And so as a sort of gesture of good faith and also frankly to chip away at that liability, each year for a number of years now we have allocated $40 million into the OPEB liability trust fund, which is a sort of down payment. It is not as much as we will need to put in once we reach that 2027 and shift from pensions into fully funding OPEB, but it is a start, and so it's an important piece of the city's commitment to fiscal health. 0804, transportation investments, and 0805, they're both transportation investment dockets. 0804 is coming from the parking meter fund. There's a restriction on that fund by state law that it has to be spent on transportation-related measures. This docket was introduced as part of the original budget, but it was at $8.6 million, and then in response to some major key transportation projects that councilors have spotlighted in the resubmission, it was increased to $12.6 million, so it's gone up by $4 million. The $2 million 0805, that's unchanged from the original submission. That's TNC funds, also known as basically the funds the city gets from Uber and Lyft usage. That is as high as it can responsibly be, given the fact that use of rideshare cars was significantly lower this year. So $2 million is kind of what's projected for that fund. And so again, there's a restriction by state law that those need to be spent on related uses. 0810 is $55 million. It's the American Rescue Plan funds that backfill for revenue losses to support, again, the operating budget that we just passed. So this is a critical link docket. And then 0687 is another $50 million of American Rescue Plan funds that was introduced by the administration, really focused on 3 to 6 month interventions and mainly programs that we already are running or where we ran out of money. So for instance, the biggest appropriation in that is to re-up the Small Business Relief Fund. There's an effort on several things where we had applications and we ran out of money, like on commercial rent relief, to kind of go back and address those back, that set of unsatisfied applications. There's a bunch of vaccine-related work. Something that Councillor Flynn's brought up a number of times is the fact that we're seeing a concerning uptick in HIV throughout our community, and there's money in this for that. There's also $3 million for mass and cast, which along with the $3 million that we've discussed in the supplemental puts us at 6 in new investments. $4.6 million for AOP that complements the 15.4 in the supplemental, so that with this docket and the late file will be at $20 million in new resources for the acquisition opportunity program. That's, this big priority that we as a council have been discussing to really make sure that we can make more permanently affordable housing in the city by grabbing things off the market that are there right now. And then on the, another example would be we have $600,000 in the supplemental to support the BHA rolling out Wi-Fi in its community and public spaces to really help many of our lowest income residents in Boston. So there's $400,000 for that in this appropriation, $600,000 in the other, so that it gets collectively to $1 million. So it's really complementary to the other docket. And one of the things that we did do, folks will remember we had a hearing, we held this in committee. One of the things that we did in the interim was get information from the administration, which I've shared with the council, just about the geographic distribution of these programs, making sure that the things that are included in this are sort of, the impacts will be broadly felt across the city. They were very broadly distributed. Some more info on the AOP program, some more details on the mass and CAS spending. So as chair, I feel comfortable recommending this for passage today. And then the last of these dockets is 0725, which is related to an increase in the COLA base. So again, back to the retirement system, our retirees get their annual pensions based on how much they earned and how long they served for the city. But there is a cost of living increase that's built in to recognize the fact that after people retire and as people live longer and longer, blessedly, the costs of everything are going up, and that can make staying at a constant pension really tough. We have a 3% bump every year that the retirement board and the council typically supports, but it's only on, so this is like, 3% cost of living adjustment, but it's only on the first $14,000 of your pension. And there's been long-time advocacy by many of our retired city workers, and especially those with the smallest pensions, which often affects folks who were part-time teachers, who had interruptions in employment, et cetera, for whom this is proportionally the biggest impact, asking us to have that base, the COLA base that the 3% gets multiplied by, be higher. And there are other cities and towns in Massachusetts that have that base as high as 18,000. We have it at 14,000, and the proposal that has been ratified by the retirement board in May and now brought to us is to have it go from 14,000 to 15,000, which I know a number of councilors advocated for. And the money to make that possible is, again, it's in the operating budget. So the docket that we just passed included $5.6 million for this year, because obviously when you do that, you're paying more to retirees, and so the numbers go up. And so we have now funded that, which makes me comfortable proposing that we make it now possible in law for us to do by raising the COLA base. So that's 0725. So thank you everyone for your indulgence on those 6 dockets, but Mr. President, as my committee report says, I would like to recommend all 6 for passage today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Bok. Is there any further discussion on these dockets? Seeing and hearing none, Councillor Bok, Chair of the Committee on Ways and Means, seeks passage of each of these dockets, and they will be voted on separately. So, Madam Clerk, would you please begin by calling the roll for docket 0803, which is the OPEB docket.
Thank you, Mr. President. Docket 0803, Councilor Arroyo.
Yes.
Councilor Arroyo, yes. Councilor Baker.
Aye.
Councilor Baker, aye. Councilor Bok.
Yes.
Councilor Bok, yes. Councilor Braden.
Yes.
Councilor Braden, yes. Councilor Campbell.
Yes.
Councilor Campbell, yes. Councilor Edwards.
Yes.
Councilor Edwards, yes. Councilor Asabi George.
Yes.
Councilor Asabi George, yes. Councilor Flaherty.
Yes.
Councilor Flaherty, yes. Councilor Flynn.
Yes.
Councilor Flynn, yes. Councilor Mejia. Councilor Mejia, yes. Councilor O'Malley.
Yes.
Councilor O'Malley, yes. And Councilor Wu. Yes. Councilor Wu, yes. Mr. President, docket number 0803 has passed unanimously.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would you now please call the roll for docket 0804, which is transfer appropriations?
Thank you. Docket 0804, Councilor Arroyo.
Yes.
Councilor Arroyo, yes. Councilor Baker.
Aye.
Councilor Baker, aye. Councilor Bok.
Aye.
Councilor Bok, aye. Councilor Braden.
Yes.
Councilor Braden, yes. Councilor Campbell.
Yes.
Councilor Campbell, yes. Councilor Edwards. Yes. Councilor Edwards, yes. Councilor Asabi George.
Yes.
Councilor Asabi George, yes. Councilor Flaherty.
Yes.
Councilor Flaherty, yes. Councilor Flynn.
Yes.
Councilor Flynn, yes. Councilor Mejia.
Yes.
Councilor Mejia, yes. Councilor O'Malley.
Yes.
Councilor O'Malley, yes. And Councilor Wu. Yes. Councilor Wu, yes. Mr. President, docket number 0804 has passed unanimously.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Would you now please call the roll for docket 0805, ARP, revenue replacements?
Docket 0805, Councilor Arroyo.
Yes.
Councilor Arroyo, yes. Councilor Baker.
Aye.
Councilor Baker, aye. Councilor Bok.
Aye.
Councilor Bok, aye. Councilor Braden.
Yes.
Councilor Braden, yes. Councilor Campbell.
Yes.
Councilor Campbell, yes. Councilor Edwards. Councilor Edwards, yes. Councilor Asabi George. Councilor Asabi George, yes. Councilor Flaherty.
Yes.
Councilor Flaherty, yes. Councilor Flynn.
Yes.
Councilor Flynn, yes. Councilor Mejia. Councilor Mejia, yes. Councilor O'Malley.
Yes.
Councilor O'Malley, yes. And Councilor Wu. Yes. Councilor Wu, yes. Mr. President, docket number 0805 has received a unanimous vote.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Would you now please call docket 0810, which I believe is ARP investments? Yes.
Thank you. Docket 0810, Councilor Arroyo.
Yes.
Councilor Arroyo, yes. Councilor Baker.
Aye.
Councilor Baker, aye. Councilor Bok.
Aye.
Councilor Bok, aye. Councilor Braden.
Yes.
Councilor Braden, yes. Councilor Campbell.
Yes.
Councilor Campbell, yes. Councilor Edwards. Councilor Edwards, yes. Councilor Asabi George.
Yes.
Councilor Asabi George, yes. Councilor Flaherty.
Yes.
Councilor Flaherty, yes. Councilor Flynn.
Yes.
Councilor Flynn, yes. Councilor Mejia. Counselor Mejia, yes. Counselor O'Malley?
Yes.
Counselor O'Malley, yes. Counselor Wu? Yes. Counselor Wu, yes. Mr. President, docket number 0810 has passed unanimously.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Would you now please read docket I believe 0687?
Thank you.
Thank you, which is further ARP investments.
Docket 0687, Counselor Arroyo.
Yes.
Counselor Arroyo, yes. Counselor Baker. Aye. Counselor Baker, aye. Counselor Bok. Aye. Counselor Bok, aye. Counselor Braden. Yes. Counselor Braden, yes. Counselor Campbell. Yes. Counselor Campbell, yes. Counselor Edwards. Counselor Edwards, yes. Counselor Asabi George. Yes. Counselor Asabi George, yes. Counselor Flaherty. Yes. Counselor Flaherty, yes. Counselor Flynn. Yes. Counselor Flynn, yes. Counselor Mejia. Counselor Mejia, yes. Counselor O'Malley.
Yes.
Counselor O'Malley, yes. And Counselor Wu. Yes. Counselor Wu, yes. Mr. President, docket number 0687 has received a unanimous vote.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And finally, would you please call the roll for docket 0725, which is COLA adjustments?
Thank you. Docket 0725, Counselor Arroyo.
Yes.
Counselor Arroyo, yes. Counselor Baker.
Aye.
Counselor Baker, aye. Counselor Bok.
Aye.
Counselor Bok, aye. Counselor Braden.
Yes.
Counselor Braden, yes. Counselor Campbell.
Yes.
Counselor Campbell, yes. Counselor Edwards, yes. I'm sorry. Did I jump ahead of you? I'm sorry. Counselor Asabi George. Yes. Counselor Asabi George, yes. Counselor Flaherty.
Yes.
Counselor Flaherty, yes. Counselor Flynn.
Yes.
Counselor Flynn, yes. Counselor Mejia. Counselor Mejia, yes. Counselor O'Malley.
Yes.
Counselor O'Malley, yes. And Counselor Wu. Yes. Counselor Wu, yes. Mr. President, docket 0725 has received a unanimous vote.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Thank you, Chair Bok. That concludes most of our budget votes. We will be ratifying the capital budget votes when we get to the green sheet section, which will be after a couple more steps. But we're now moving on to motions, orders, and resolutions. Madam Clerk, would you please read docket 0834?
Thank you. Docket 0834, Councilor Edwards offered the following order for hearing regarding creation of a Boston-Cambridge Tourism Marketing District pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 40X.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The Chair now recognizes the District Council from East Boston, Councilor Lydia Edwards. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Last week I was late file, Lydia. Now I'm lonely file, Lydia. But so I'll be. I know we have a lot before us, but this is a really big deal. This is really exciting, actually. So just a quick background. You know, our hotels and our tourism industry struggled immensely in this moment, and this recovery, especially, is important for us to take bold steps and to come up with regenerative funds that are not necessarily coming out of our tax dollars, but are coming out of resources and tools that are now been given to us by the State House. What has happened is that the State House, specifically Chairman Michaelwitz, adopted a tourism bid as an option in the budget file last year. What does that mean? Well, it's a lot like our downtown bids. It allows for, in the downtown bids, for those businesses or properties bordering the greenway to opt into an additional fee to help maintain the greenway. Well, the hotels want to do the same thing. They have opted in to, or they have filed to opt in with us for a tourism bid where they will assess a fee and they will use that money to promote tourism. A lot of the things in our district, and tourism throughout Boston and throughout Cambridge. So that is the goal, because right now we don't really have a line item for tourism to help promote them or even to save them. A lot of the hotels were just devastated. So that's the background. But the endorser organizations for this are very diverse, and you will see in your packet, you have a huge packet of what they filed, specifically what they plan to do. And I would encourage you to go through it because we're going to have a comprehensive hearing. But the endorsing organizations include the Boston Black Hospitality Coalition, Boston Duck Tours, Boston Tea Party Ships, Delta Airlines, Freedom Trail Foundation, Historic Tours of America, and so on and so forth. What we're trying to do is make sure that we create a regenerative fund, and if this fee, which they're proposing is 1.5% of their room rental rates, is adopted, they will assess that fee and they will generate $10 million a year to help tourism. That would go to all sorts of things, including the trellis in my district. Not saying I'm a little biased, but if we're going to put it there, there's that. There's cleanup. There's paying for workers. There's ecotourism. We made sure when we went through and wrote all of the ways in which the money could be spent, when we did this with the Greater Boston Convention, it was about multilingual services, it was about making sure we had a diversity pipeline, it was making sure all the hotels from Roxbury, Hyde Park, East Boston, everybody throughout the city was going to benefit from this, not just the downtown hotels. And our sisters and brothers in Cambridge had to come under us and trust that we could do this. So we are now the lead, and they did vote to come under us in this entire comprehensive deal. We do have some marching orders, though. If we agree to take this on, we have to have a hearing within 60 days. We have to go through this packet and to make sure that it's compliant with the law, and then we must pass this after the hearing within 45 days. That's a big deal, and the hotels want us to do this. They have decided to tax themselves and to use that money to promote their industry and tourism. Again, you can go through the packet, we can go back and forth. It's been signed by all the hotels, or vast majority of hotels in the geographic region. So they're hoping that we will opt into this law, and yeah, will be the first time that this happens, I think, in the Commonwealth, because this law just passed last year as an opt-in. So we continue to lead, and we continue to follow the law that's prescribed and the deadlines therein, yet again. And so I hope that we will have a hearing as soon as possible, or that we can coordinate that. I do hope that we will coordinate it with the tourism committee, specifically with my good friend, Councilor Baker, to make sure that that money and the goals are truly spread throughout all of Boston. And so I will stop there. I hope you guys will support it, sign on to it, and we can get this conversation started.
Thank you very much, Councillor Edwards. The chair recognizes the district councillor from Dorchester, Councillor Baker. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, just great idea. I definitely want to sign my name on it. Quick question through the chair to the maker. Somewhat of a bid?
Yes, it's literally a marketing bid.
No, like a bid, a business improvement district, but we don't have a continuous, are we looking for the continuous area, so that's where the bid will be?
It is exactly that, except they put in the packet the map of where it will be.
Okay,
The
and
geographic
we'll
areas
handle all
outlined.
that at the within 60 days of this filing here, so.
We need
You're
to
putting
have
me
a
to
hearing.
work?
Yes.
Aye, aye.
Thank you, Councillor
Thank you, Mr.
Baker.
Chair.
Madam Clerk, please add Councillor Frank Baker as a co-sponsor. Any further discussion on docket 0834? Would any councillors wish to add their name? Madam Clerk, please add Councillor Arroyo, Councillor Bok, Councillor Braden, Councillor Campbell, Councillor Saibi George, Councillor Flaherty, Councillor Flynn, Councillor Mejia, Councillor Wu. Please add the chair's name as well. And multiple committee, Matt will take lonely file Lydia's hearing order, docket 0834, and jointly refer it to the Committee on Government Operations as well as the Committee on Arts, Culture, and Special Events. We are now moving on to late files. I'm informed by the clerk that there are two late files. The first is an ordinance. The second is a late file matter sponsored by the Mayor's Office regarding the budget. All those in favor of adding the late file matters into the agenda, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Okay, the late file matters have hereby been added. Madam Clerk, would you please read the first and last of the first late file matter into the record?
Certainly. To the City Council, dear councilors, I hereby transmit for your approval an order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and expend an amount of That's what I had. I'm sorry, I thought, that's what I had, so.
I apologize, Madam
No,
Clerk. The first
no,
one
no,
is the
It's
salary.
a salary, good, great. Thank you, I'm sorry for that. Offered by Councilor Matt O'Malley, an ordinance amending CBC 2-8.3. Be it ordained that the City Council of Boston as follows, that the City of Boston Code be amended as follows. Section 1, CBC 2-8.3, for the conduct of the affairs of City Council, there will be, in addition to City Clerk, a central staff director, and other such subordinate officers as may be appointed by the majority of the City Council from time to time. Such central staff director and subordinate officers shall perform such duties as the Council may provide by order from time to time, and they shall need annual salary determined by Council, order from within the salary ranges below. The City Council President may designate a central staff member to serve in the capacity of Deputy Central Staff Director and may award a stipend. Do you want me to read the last?
No. Filed in the council. I'll just add, filed in the city council, June 30th, 2021.
Thank you.
I thought you were going to do that, Madam Clerk.
Got a good memory.
God bless you. Councilor O'Malley, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's like riding a bike, right? We've spent a lot, and there will be more times thanking individuals, and I wanted to just specifically call out and thank the exceptional work of our central staff. Yelady Valdez, Michelle Goldberg, Kerry Jordan, Christine O'Donnell, Juan Lopez, Cora Montrand, Candice Morales, Shane Pack, Ron Cobb, Lorraine Scatino, and Ashley Vassell. They have done remarkable work during the pandemic and beyond, and part of what we voted on in our operating budget was a long overdue salary increase for our central staffers. That's what's before us right now. I want to be clear. This does not affect councilor's salary at all. I will let all of you deal with that when I am long gone. This is about central staff as well as council budget, so we had to file this as a late file matter. I'm going to ask for suspension of the rules and adoption of this because it will allow us to really recognize the fact that these individuals in many cases have not had a significant or a pay raise at all in many, many years. They do yeoman's work. None of us get rich by working in government, and these are the true public servants. They are a credit to this city, to the institution of the Boston City Council. I've also added language in this that is a new rule that will be going forward, that whomever the council president is may designate an existing individual to support the yeoman's work that our staff director, Yelady Valdez, does. So I also wanted to announce today that in addition to being our television programming and technology director, I'm going to name Kerry Jordan as the deputy staff director as well, a designation to help him continue to support the remarkable work of the central staff. So that's all. We can clap on that. Madam Chair, so again, I'd like to ask for suspension and adoption, or suspension and passage rather, but obviously if any other councilors wish to speak, they may do so. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. Anyone else looking to speak on this? Councilor Bok, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'd simply like to say for the public that, across city departments in general, the staff below the managerial level mostly are unionized, and that means that they get to negotiate salary increases on a step-by-step basis over years. And so, for instance, for the last few years, so as many folks know, we're out of contract right now, but in the prior set of 3 years, most of our department staff had gotten what people call a 222, right? Which means we were talking about cost of living increases before. It meant that people were getting a little bit of a bump to their salary, modest, right? A 2% cost of living increase across most of our unionized departments. And I think it's worth noting that our central staff at the council side does not have that situation. And also that the way that our funding works, the council needs to pass an ordinance like this merely in order to increase staff salary ranges so that such kind of increases can be afforded to folks. So it's a little bit clunky, and I think it's important that it's something that we do, and I'm glad that funding to make it possible is in the operating budget that we passed a few moments ago, and super grateful to our President Pro Tempore, Councilor O'Malley, for his leadership on this. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Bok. Councilor Arroyo, you have the floor.
Thank you, and I'll be brief. Unlike many of our hearings over the last year that have been online, and I just want to take a moment to thank our central staff because I know that we were having, obviously it was a pandemic, there were a lot of different things we had to do, and our central staff made sure that every single hearing, sometimes we're talking about 3 a day, we're talking about hearings that went on until 7, 8 p.m., that went in on Fridays until 7 or 8 p.m., and they were doing these back to back to back to back, that they went off seamlessly. It actually became something that I didn't even have to think about. I just knew the hearing is going to run the way I need the hearing to run, and I can't think of anything more profound to say than just deeply a thank you, because all of the different things that folks were juggling on this council, I can honestly say not at any point did I think that I would have any issues, nor did I, with any of the hearings and all of the things that we were trying to do for the first time. We've never done them before, so this was all on the fly, and they were excellently done. The staff was excellent in making sure that we did this, and they really did go above and beyond on schedule and on time. in a way that I think they're sort of unsung heroes on. So I want to thank our central staff for all the work they did over the last year. They're very deserving of this. And so I appreciate the chair for his leadership, Councilor Bok for hers, and for the fact that this is in this budget, because they deserve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. Anyone else looking to speak on this matter? I'll just echo and say thank you on behalf of all of us, of course, to central staff for their hard work over the last year. So thank you. Madam Clerk, if we could call the roll call vote.
Thank you. For the first late file on salaries, Councilor Arroyo.
Yes.
Councilor Arroyo, yes. Councilor Baker.
Aye.
Councilor Baker, aye. Councilor Bok.
Aye.
Councilor Bok, aye. Councilor Braden. Yes. Councilor Braden, yes. Councilor Campbell.
Yes.
Councilor Campbell, yes. Councilor Edwards. Yes. Councilor Edwards, yes. Councilor Asabi George.
Yes.
Councilor Asabi George, yes. Councilor Flaherty.
Yes.
Councilor Flaherty, yes. Councilor Flynn.
Yes.
Councilor Flynn, yes. Councilor Mejia. Councilor Mejia, yes. Councilor O'Malley.
Yes.
You never know where you're going to be. Councilor O'Malley, yes. And Councilor Wu. Councilor Wu, yes. The first late file matter has passed unanimously.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The first late file matter is passed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madam Clerk. Would you now please, we're moving on to the second late file matter. Would you please read the first and last of the second late file matter into the record?
Thank you. City of Boston, Massachusetts, Kim Janey, Mayor, to the City Council. Dear councilors, I hereby transmit for your approval an order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and expend a $31,500,000 in the form of a grant awarded by the United States Department of Treasury to be administered by the City of Boston's Chief Financial Officer / Collector Treasurer. I urge your honorable body to adopt this order so that the City of Boston may accept the funds expeditiously and expend them upon award for the purpose for which they are granted.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The chair recognizes the Chair of the Committee on Ways and Means, Councilor Kenzie Bok. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. This is the late filed supplemental appropriation that I referred to earlier in the meeting, and that really is the result of the council's work over the last few weeks, and represents, I know, the basis on which many councilors felt comfortable voting for the operating budget. Although I read this before, I will just again read the list of things included, because it's probably worth noting that the way that the order gets filed is in the three buckets that ARP funding is allocated to, so it's sort of all rolled up in three different categories, and that sort of has to do with the language of the ARPA Act and how it's meant to be designated. But again, just so that councilors are aware of the numbers in here, so it's $15.4 million for AOP. We obviously already earlier, a few moments ago, authorized $4.6 million for AOP in another docket, so that's what puts us at 20 in new funds for the Acquisition Opportunity Program. $2 million for land trusts, $1 million for digital infrastructure, $3 million for mass and CAS. Again, that complements the other $3 million in the order we just passed. $3 million for green jobs to really complement the $1 million that was in the budget that we passed. $2 million for BPS for social workers to get us up to that 1 FTE in every school. $500,000 for this new 19 to 24-year-old year-round jobs program. That's in addition to the $300,000 in the resubmission for $800,000 total. Another $500,000 in addition to what's there already for the High Roads Kitchens program. The $600,000 for the BHA's public Wi-Fi rollout to complement the $400,000 that we just authorized. $1 million for additional childcare supports focused on the Child Care Entrepreneur Fund. That again has another $250,000 in the budget. Another $2 million for slow streets and transportation priorities, which complements another $2.3 million that was added in the resubmission, and some other funds that were already in the budget on that. And then $500,000 for the Green Homes retrofit program. So those things together add up to the $31.5 million here. And as this really is in response to the council's very specific advocacy and represents kind of the other complementary piece to the budget that the council just felt comfortable passing, I would today, Mr. President, urge suspension and passage of this late file docket number 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Bok. Is there any further discussion on the second late file docket? Seeing and hearing none. Councillor Kenzie. I'm sorry, the chair recognizes the at-large crowds from South Boston.
Do we have a copy of that one?
I believe they've been handed out through our city messenger.
Flynn stole it.
Okay, thank you. So once again, seeing no further discussion on the second late file matter, Councillor Bok, as the chair of the Committee on Ways and Means, moves suspension of the rules and passage of this, the second late file matter, which is, for all intents and purposes, the other part of our budget. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. President. Second late file matter supplemental. Councillor Arroyo.
Yes.
Councillor Arroyo, yes. Councillor Baker.
Aye.
Councillor Baker, aye. Councillor Bok.
Aye.
Councillor Bok, aye. Councillor Braden. Yes. Councillor Braden, yes. Councillor Campbell. Present. Councillor Campbell, present. Councillor Edwards. Yes. Councillor Edwards, yes. Councillor Asabi George. Yes. Councillor Asabi George, yes. Councillor Flaherty. Yes. Councillor Flaherty, yes. Councillor Flynn.
Yes.
Councillor Flynn, yes. Councillor Mejia. Yes. Councillor Mejia, yes. Councillor O'Malley.
Yes.
Councillor O'Malley, yes. And Councillor Wu. Yes. Councillor Wu, yes. Mr. President, the second late file matter on the supplemental has passed with 11 votes in the affirmative and 1 present.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. We are now moving along to the green sheets. Any member wishing to remove a matter from the green sheets may do so at this time. The chair recognizes the district councillor from Beacon Hill, Councillor Kenzie Bok, as well as chair of the Committee on Ways and Means. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. I would like to call dockets 0529, 0530, and 0531 from the green sheets for their second reading. Councilors will find these dockets on page 2 of the green sheets under Assigned for Further Action. And detailed information on these dockets begin on page 20 of the green sheets. For those watching at home, green sheets is council terminology for a compendium of all dockets that have been filed this year. These are the 3 capital dockets, which this body took a unanimous vote on June 9th, which was their first reading, and then made them assigned for further action. That's the spot they're in now. So because the capital budget involves indebting the city, because we issue bonds, we borrow money in order to do this really important infrastructure work for our city, the charter and state law requires that these be voted on twice, at least 2 weeks apart, and with a 2/3 majority. And the idea there is, again, really to make sure that the council has considered the matter.
Let me just stop you right there, Madam Chair. Absent objection from any member of the body, the motion of the committee chair is accepted.
My apologies.
And the dockets are properly before the body, unless any individual wishes us to not take a vote on the capital budget. Thank you. Please proceed, Councillor Bok.
All right, now I'll continue in order.
Okay, and Clerk Feeney has to read them into the record, and then we will proceed.
Okay, never mind. All right, I'll be back.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, please, the floor is yours.
We're counting on it. On page 20 of 23, in the Committee on Ways and Means, docket number 0529, sponsored by the mayor, message and order approving an appropriation of $237,654,000 for the acquisition of interest in land or the acquisition of assets or the landscaping, alteration, remediation, rehabilitation, improvement of public land and construction, reconstruction, rehabilitation, improvement, alterations, remodeling, enlargement, demolition, removal, or extraordinary repairs of public buildings, facilities, assets, works, or infrastructure for the cost of feasibility studies and engineering or architectural surveys for plans and specifications for the development, design, purchase, and installation of computer hardware or software and computer-assisted integrated financial management and accounting systems, and any and all costs incidental or related to the above-described project for the purpose of various city departments, including Boston Center for Youth and Families, Department of Innovation and Technology, Environment, Fire, Neighborhood Development, Office of Arts and Culture, Parks and Recreation, Police, Property Management, Public Works, Transportation Department, Boston Public Library, Boston Redevelopment Authority, and Public Health Commission. It was originally assigned April 14th, 2021, and had its first reading on on June 9th, 2021. On page 20 of 23 in the Committee on Ways and Means, docket number 0530, sponsored by the mayor, message and order approving the appropriation of $50,438,000 for the acquisition of interests in land or the acquisition of assets or landscaping alteration, remediation, rehabilitation, and improvement of public land, the construction, reconstruction, rehabilitation, improvement, alteration, remodeling, enlargement, demolition, removal, or extraordinary repairs to public buildings, facilities, assets, works, or infrastructure, for the cost of feasibility studies or engineering or architectural services for plans and specifications, for the development, design, purchase, and installation of computer, hardware, or software, and computer-assisted integrated financial management and accounting systems, and all, and all costs incidental and related to the above described projects for the purpose of the Boston Public Schools. Once again, this was filed on April 14th and received its first reading on June 9th, 2021. And docket number 0531 on page 21 of 23 in the Committee on Ways and Means, sponsored by the mayor. Message and order authorizing the City of Boston to enter into one or more leases, lease purchase, or installment sales agreements in fiscal year 2022, an amount not to exceed $31 million. These funds are to be used for various city departments for the acquisition of equipment and furtherance of their respective governmental functions. The list of equipments include computer equipment, hardware and software, motor vehicles, trailers, ambulances, firefighting equipment, office equipment, telecommunication equipment, photocopying equipment, medical equipment, school and educational equipment, school buses, parking meters, street lighting installation, traffic signal equipment, and equipment functionally related to and components of the foregoing. Filed in April 14th, 2021, and received its first reading on June 9th, 2021.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Now, absent objection, the motion of the committee chair is accepted, and these three dockets are properly before the body.
Good.
Chair Bok, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Sorry to be overeager. As I was saying, these are the capital dockets. We've already taken a vote on them, a favorable unanimous vote on June 9th. And they're now looking for their second affirmative supermajority vote from this council. They represent a large number of things that councilors have advocated for throughout the process. The capital budget is very dear to my heart because I think that the funny thing about cities is that when you price out a capital investment, you usually price it out for its sort of like official life, which is maybe 30, 40, 50 years. The reality in a city like Boston is that we tend to use our infrastructure for at least a century. And while that means that, you know, in the case of our school buildings, we're talking about real infrastructure needs, it also means that basically every dollar that we spend on these critical public investments in the city of Boston is really a dollar very well spent, and I would love to see us do even more of it, and this is collectively the largest capital budget that the city of Boston has ever had, while being under our policy limit of not borrowing more than would incur only 7% of our operating budget going to debt service. So it represents a responsible capital budget, but also a substantial one. I think we could always get more of these projects actually out the door so that we get closer to that ceiling than we get. But passing these dockets today is a really important first step. And I know I'm excited about things in District 8 and that others feel similarly about other items throughout the city. So, Mr. Chair, I would ask that the council give these three items their second reading and pass them in the affirmative. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is there any further discussion on dockets 529, 530, or 531? Seeing none, we will vote on these individually with a roll call vote. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll on docket 0529?
Thank you. Docket 0529 for its second reading. Councilor Arroyo?
Yes.
Councilor Arroyo, yes. Councilor Baker?
Aye.
Councilor Baker, aye. Councilor Bok? Aye. Counselor Bok, aye. Counselor Braden? Yes. Counselor Braden, yes. Counselor Campbell? Yes. Counselor Campbell, yes. Counselor Edwards? Yes. Counselor Edwards, yes. Counselor Asabi George? Yes. Counselor Asabi George, yes. Counselor Flaherty?
Yes.
Counselor Flaherty, yes. Counselor Flynn?
Yes.
Counselor Flynn, yes. Counselor Mejia? Counselor Mejia, yes. Counselor O'Malley?
Yes.
Counselor O'Malley, yes. And Counselor Wu? Yes. Counselor Wu, yes. Mr. President, docket number 0529 has unanimously received its second reading.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Would you now please call the roll on docket 0530?
Docket 0530 for its second reading. Counselor Arroyo?
Yes.
Counselor Arroyo, yes. Counselor Baker?
Aye.
Counselor Baker, aye. Counselor Bok? Aye. Counselor Bok, aye. Counselor Braden?
Yes.
Counselor Braden, yes. Counselor Campbell?
Yes.
Counselor Campbell, yes. Counselor Edwards?
Yes.
Counselor Edwards, yes. Counselor Asabi George?
Yes.
Counselor Asabi George, yes. Counselor Flaherty?
Yes.
Counselor Flaherty, yes. Counselor Flynn?
Yes.
Counselor Flynn, yes. Counselor Mejia? Counselor Mejia, yes. Counselor O'Malley?
Yes.
Counselor O'Malley, yes. And Counselor Wu?
Yes.
Counselor Wu, yes. Mr. President, docket number 0530 has unanimously received its second reading.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Would you now please call the roll on docket 0531?
Docket 0531 for its second reading. Counselor Arroyo?
Yes.
Counselor Arroyo, yes. Counselor Baker?
Aye.
Counselor Baker, aye. Counselor Bok?
Aye.
Counselor Bok, aye. Counselor Braden?
Yes.
Counselor Braden, yes. Counselor Campbell?
Yes.
Counselor Campbell, yes. Counselor Edwards?
Yes.
Counselor Edwards, yes. Counselor Asabi George?
Yes.
Counselor Asabi George, yes. Counselor Flaherty?
Yes.
Counselor Flaherty, yes. Counselor Flynn?
Yes.
Counselor Flynn, yes. Counselor Mejia? Counselor Mejia, yes. Counselor O'Malley?
Yes.
Counselor O'Malley, yes. And Counselor Wu?
Yes.
Counselor Wu, yes. Mr. President, docket number 0531 has unanimously received its second reading.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So again, those watching, that concludes the budget process. Thank you again, Councillor Bok. The chair recognizes the district councillor from Dorchester, Councillor Baker. You have the
Green
floor.
sheets, Mr. Chair.
Now is the time if you'd like to remove
Thank
something
you.
from the green sheets.
Let me first just start by saying this is not a hostile poll. I'd like to rise to pull the matter from the green sheets and invoke Rule 24. The matter is on page 15 of 23. Docket number 0100. If you could read. Oh.
Just 1 second, Councillor Baker, please.
What?
Okay, so,
0100 on 15 of 23.
okay, Madam Clerk, would you please, that is in the Public Safety and Criminal Justice, so I'm going to call on the chair, but Madam Clerk, would you please read that green sheet docket?
On page 15 of 23, Public Safety and Criminal Justice Committee, docket 0100, sponsored by the mayor. Message and order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and expend an amount of $850,000 in the form of a grant for the FY20 Boston Regional Intelligence Center earmarked awarded by the Mass Executive Office of Public Safety and Security to be administered by the Police Department. The grant will fund upgrading, expanding, and integrating technology and protocols related to anti-terrorism, anti-crime, and anti-gang and emergency response. This was first filed on February 26, 2020.
Okay, well, the chair is going to call the committee chair on Public Safety and Criminal Justice. Chair Campbell, did you wish to speak? I apologize, did you wish to speak as chair of the committee on this before we?
I will just say, as chair of the Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice, I'm not pulling this document, but of course, under the rules, another counselor may.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Councillor Campbell.
But you need...
Do you need votes? So Rule 24?
Yep.
Yes, dictates that if a matter has been in the green sheets for 120 days, it may be called by 5 members of the council. And this has been in for longer than 120 days, Madam Clerk, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to call the roll to see if this docket 0100 will be properly before us. You need 5 members to make it, to put it before the body.
Point of information, Madam Chair, I just haven't looked at it.
I'm sorry.
Is it 5 members of the whole council?
The whole council, yes.
Okay.
So once it gets beyond 100, once it reaches 120, it's not the committee, it is the entire council.
Okay. And just again, the chair recognizes Councillor Baker before we vote to put this before us.
Am I able to speak on this before we have the initial vote, or do we need the initial vote?
We need the
before I
initial
can
vote
speak?
first, which is just to
Okay.
place this before us.
Thank you.
And then an individual that does not wed him or her to voting for it once it's before us. So this is the first step. Is everyone clear on putting this matter before us? Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you. On Rule 24 for docket number 0100. Councilor Arroyo.
No.
Councilor Arroyo, no. Councilor Baker.
Aye.
Councilor Baker, aye. Councilor Bok. No. Councilor Bok, no. Councilor Braden. No. Councilor Braden, no. Councilor Campbell. No. Councilor Campbell, no. Councilor Edwards. No. Councilor Edwards, no. Councilor Asabi George. Yes. Councilor Asabi George, yes. Councilor Flaherty.
Yes.
Councilor Flaherty, yes. Councilor Flynn.
Yes.
Councilor Flynn, yes. Councilor Mejia. No. Councilor Mejia, no. Councilor O'Malley.
Yes.
Councilor O'Malley, yes. Councilor Wu. No. Councilor Wu, no. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 votes in support of removing docket 0100 from committee.
Thank you. The chair.
Matter is properly before the body.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. This green sheet matter is properly before the body. The chair recognizes the district councillor from Dorchester.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like I said at the beginning, this is not a hostile poll. This is within my duties here. This is the absolute last day that we can accept this money, and if we vote it down, we vote it down, we don't get the money. This money was referred to committee on February 26, 2020, 487 days ago. Since April 1st, there have been well over 20 people shot. And there's also been multiple people shot in May and June to date. Over the weekend on May 4th, 4 people were shot, 2 in the head in C11, which is my home police district. 2 people shot in the head in C11 alone. Luckily, no one died. There was 1 stabbing in the South End, gang-related. There was 20 shots fired near Vine Street Community Center, where children and families gather. There were shots fired at Moakley Park. I think there was 30 shots fired down there, hundreds of people down there. The gang unit has recovered almost 40 firearms to date. Residents and tourists want to come visit, live, and work in the city, but they need to feel safe. The $850 grant to the BRIC earmarked for 6 civilian analyst positions is in danger of being sent back to the Commonwealth if action is not taken before the end of the month. Withholding funds that will be used to combat violence in the city is seriously risking lives, and I would feel delinquent in my own job if I didn't at least try to pull this out for a vote. We have a fiscal responsibility as a city council to be transparent to those we represent and to provide the Boston Police Departments and all departments with the support they all need to keep our residents and businesses safe. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on this docket? The chair recognizes the chair of the Committee on Criminal Justice and Public Safety, Councillor Campbell. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I, of course, respect the rules. I had been approached maybe a month ago by a couple of other councilors about this particular docket. And as I explained to them, there were several hearings on this. At those hearings, we heard from constituents around major concerns related to the BRIC. One had to do with, of course, its entanglement with ICE. I know several councilors have brought that up. And there was actually not a full and complete response from the BRIC about that entanglement. They continue to stand in their position that the city of Boston does not work with ICE. That is completely false, based on actual cases where we've seen folks deported as a result of inequities and actions by our police department, including with our Boston Public Schools. The second reason this is remaining in committee, the BRIC and the department agreed there are significant racial disparities within the BRIC, significant. Out of every department within our police department, significant. We have been waiting for a meaningful response from the BRIC on how they're going to address those racial inequities. And let me tell you, as a black woman, I got real concerns about that. And we have not received something in response that is significantly demonstrated that they're willing to take the action steps to address those. We did receive some changes, proposed changes to the gang database. Even those were very surface level, according to folks who've been doing work in this space for a really long time. I'll also add, there is a lack of transparency and a lack of accountability with the BRIC. It is very closed off. As the chair of the Committee on Public Safety, I've spent a lot of time at BPD. I spent so much time at BPD in my first year in the council, many suggested that if the council didn't work out for me, I could get a job at BPD. Because I wanted to learn about what they do. I wanted to get a deeper understanding of what our officers, our civilians do on the job. And I wanted to know that so that when I was also hearing from residents about significant concerns with the BRIC, as well as other councilors, that I could respond appropriately. There continues to be a lack of transparency and accountability with the BRIC. I held this docket because it was one tool in our toolkit to get them and to push them to do better on all of these issues, much of which many councilors are advocating for and have been long before I even got to the council. And the last piece, this suggestion, one, that maybe I or other councilors don't care about safety in our neighborhood is absolutely ridiculous. I live in Mattapan. I experienced those incidents of violence. I represent District 4. District 4 is largely Dorchester, Mattapan, C11 is in my district, B3 is in my district. I have part of B2 and E18. I work closely with my captains, I work closely with my CSOs. They do an incredible job, I get that. And what I've said for a really long time is that there is still a way within our police department to ensure that we have adequate coverage in our neighborhoods and adequate police coverage. And I've heard this from captains, superintendents, sergeants, retired from our department, and still within our department, that we have the human capital if we restructure this department and send our officers back to the districts that have the highest number of calls. They have never done that. In our last budget hearing, I asked them, have you ever tried it over the years? No, Counselor, we haven't. That's shameful. So to suggest that this particular docket, which is $850,000 and funds analysts, this is not even going to send people on the streets. This doesn't fund officers to actually show up in our neighborhoods on the ground and to respond to incidents of violence. If anything, this has them analyzing, and that's the very question. What are they analyzing? Who are they surveilling? What are they doing with the gang database? So I absolutely understand the predicament in which we're in. I absolutely understand we have to respond to incidents of violence in the city of Boston that I live with as well. I also understand there's a way to do that. What I'll also add, because I think this piece is also lost in this entire conversation, that this framing of us versus them. Police alone will never, I'm using the word never, eradicate the incidents of violence in the city of Boston. They play one role, and of course we want to make sure they're taken care of while they're in the job and after they're on the job. And I firmly believe in taking care of our officers. But the other piece that is critically important, what people who've been doing the work on the ground for a long time have also said and stressed to all of us, some of us get it, some of us just don't. We have to address the root causes of violence. That's moving people out of poverty. And I've brought programs into my district to do just that. That's giving folks jobs. And I know Councilor Baker cares about that. That's giving them economic opportunity. That's making sure they have access to green space, good housing, a good education, mental health supports, addressing trauma, trauma-informed education. And let me tell you, those root causes of violence are not adequately addressed. They don't have the human capital they need. They don't have the resources they need. And folks who have been doing this work in the community, with our hospitals on the ground, they cry out every single day, we need more resources. We need more human capital. This is a $400 million budget, a $70 million overtime budget, over 2,000 officers in the system. I absolutely think there's enough there to do the work with a sense of urgency, and if there's a willingness to shift the culture within the department to restructure, to give that safety and coverage to those neighborhoods, if they would even be willing to try, while at the same time taking a small percentage of that budget and redirecting it to the root causes of violence, because that's the only way we're going to be successful in this endeavor. We can continue to do the Band-Aid approach. It's not working. We can then, of course, decide to roll up our sleeves and do the harder work, as uncomfortable as it is. No one likes changes, I get that. And this isn't just about the police department. This is a culture within the city of Boston's government that we have to think about sort of shifting things and doing things a little differently. in order to root out racial inequities, to rein in overtime costs and budgets that are just inflating, and to really respond to those folks who have showed up at all of our hearings. And many of these lawyers, by the way, I've used to work with as an attorney, who have brought forth real cases about real incidents where people were harmed by our policing model and practices, including with the brick. So that's why this is still in committee until we get an adequate response. And I just wanted to respond as the chair of the Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice. I take my role and responsibility very seriously. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Chair Campbell. The chair now recognizes the at-large counsel from Dorchester, Councilor Julia Mejia. The floor is yours.
I think Ricardo was first. Go. He was before me.
All right. The chair, Councilor Mejia withdraws for this round, perhaps the next one. The chair recognizes the district council from Hyde Park, Councilor Royal. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to first off start by thanking Councilor Campbell for everything she said. She often sometimes says what he said, and this is one of those times where I get to say what she said. There's not a whole lot more I can add to that, except to say that I'm grateful for her leadership on my time on the council as the chair of public safety and the stance that she has taken. They have not been easy. I see this as another one of those moments, and I think it's important that folks understand that you are appreciated when you take those stances. I was a public defender, but before I was a public defender, I've always been a person of color in this city. I was a Latino boy in this city. I was harassed for having my O'Brien track bag on the way back from White Stadium once thrown up against a wall because somehow, somewhere, something may have happened where some kid who was wearing his O'Brien track colors, apparently with his O'Brien track bag, needed to get patted down and searched against his consent. I coached youth baseball where I had 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds who knew that in the eyes of law enforcement, their eyes, they were not always seen as people worthy of respect, as people who should be treated the way they should. We have data, this is a broken record, we have data that shows that in this city, in the city of Boston, Black and Latino men are over-policed, are over-surveilled, and I want to just echo this idea that somehow being against a form of policing that makes communities feel unsafe, that puts them in harm's way, means that we're pro-violence or don't care about violence is bizarre. It's a bizarre form of argument. As somebody who has both experienced the impacts of violence, who has had people close to me murdered, it is bizarre. What I will say in regards to this is we've had several hearings on BRIC, and what we have learned is that BRIC still can't give any sample of data or even anecdotal samples of where their gang database or the surveillance that they do has actually solved or limited violence. What they did do at a meeting that we had last year during the pandemic, some of these counselors were present, it was asked what BRIC has to do with solving our open murder cases in the city of Boston, and a counselor here brought that up and asked that question. And we were told that BRIC doesn't play a role in that. That's not what BRIC does. BRIC doesn't solve murders. And so if we're going to talk about crime and violence as a justification for funding BRIC, then it might be important for BRIC to start saying that that's actually what they solve and what they do, because they don't say that. They currently do not say that. They actually say the opposite. And so when we talk about how we're going to go about getting to a different form of policing, I know it's not by continuing to write checks for processes and things that people in our community have said, this isn't serving me, this doesn't work for me. Our FIOs look the way they do. Most of the time when officers are writing FIOs, they're surveilling Black and Latino children, doing absolutely, and young men and adults, doing absolutely nothing that we would consider criminal activity. We're talking about playing basketball with their neighbors. We're talking about going to a laundromat. I use those two specific examples because I literally used 2 FIOs that said those exact things. So when we talk about what this money goes to, I would much rather those officers actually be surveilling crime, not surveilling people living their lives in their neighborhoods. Just because you are Black or Latino and you are in a neighborhood that has an impact of crime, or you happen to be in a specific frame or place, our gang database has a horrible guilt by association framework. All of these things are further reasons to not just blindly fund it. And when you can't come with real answers as to why we should fund it in the first place, That's incredibly problematic, and I know that we've had about 3 or 4 hearings. This feels like, since I've been here, we've had nothing but hearings where we have repeatedly not gotten answers to those questions, and to direct questions about what data do you have, what impact can you show for the effectiveness of these programs, the answer has consistently been nothing. And so that's what I'm going to vote for them to get from this fund, nothing. Because until you can show that you are actually doing that, you are actually increasing our safety in real tangible ways, then you have to prove that you deserve those dollars. That has not happened. I am a no.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the at-large counsel from Dorchester, Councilor Mejia. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Councilor Campbell, for your leadership. I know how difficult it is to be one to always have to speak and fight. And you've been at this for a long time. And, you know, we're getting to a point where we have a more, some energy around this work that you've been trying to push here on the council for far too long. So I'm a hard no on this as well. I always talk about, and I was the counselor that Arroyo was referring to when we had that meeting. You know, I'm curious about our return on investment. You know, we talk about the Boston Public Schools, we talk about the BPS budget, and oftentimes these schools get put on probation or get shut down. But yet we continue to fund a system that I don't see our return on investment because there's still a lot of unsolved homicides here in the city of Boston. So for me, in regards to this, I'm a hard no. And I also think, and it's not just about this funding, I think that BRIC should be abolished altogether, as well as the gang database. Those systems are not serving us. If anything, they create more of a hostile environment for folks. So that's where I'm at with that. Hard no, all day, every day.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the district counsel from East Boston, Councilor Edwards. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I am going to also be voting with my colleague, Councilor Campbell. But I wanted to ask her a question through the chair.
Sure.
If they had answered your questions, would you have released the funds?
Yes, we sent a whole bunch of questions to them asking for very reasonable requests. The short answer is yes. And
The reason why it's important for that to happen and for folks to understand is that's why I am voting. I'm voting with Councilor Campbell. As a chair of a committee who does push and move and demand and ask and gets responses and sometimes doesn't, it is that process of which the sausage, if you will, is made. And if they did not answer the question that she proposed to them several times, it is them, not her, that is not funding these positions. They were given a task, they were given an opportunity to rise to the occasion and respond. We do that for every other department. We do that for every other place, or every other city worker. So she set a standard as the committee chair for these funds, answer some questions. They did not. And for that simple reason, they're not answering that question is why I'm going to be standing with Councilor Campbell right now.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the at-large counsel from South Boston, Councilor Michael Flaherty. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the chair consider a motion to table to get those questions, brief recess and get those questions answered?
Okay.
Does that make any sense?
Through you, the chair recognizes Chair of the Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice.
I will say I'm not confident they're going to be able to respond in the next hour or so. They've had months.
Okay.
So we can proceed with the vote.
Thank you. The chair recognizes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Then just
Flaherty.
through the chair to the maker, if I could just get a list of those questions for my own edification, so in my own discussions, I could maybe try to get those answers for this body.
Yeah, the chair is nodding her head affirmatively, so I'm sure.
The same questions when Councilor Flynn and Councilor Flaherty brought the issue to me months ago, deciding not to pull this docket from the committee. They're the same questions that they were before, and there has still continued to be a lack of response. I will say the only response we did get, which I did mention, was a proposed rule change for the gang database, which I thought, based on conversations with advocates, lawyers, and many who brought the concerns around the gang database to us, including some folks who actually sent letters in favor of the database, but still said there are racial disparities and we need to do work, they didn't think that those changes were enough. And so I do want to acknowledge they came back with a small response, but nothing substantial. So happy to take a vote. I'm going to respect the rules and process, but as chair, I wanted to explain why this is still in committee. I have suspended the rules, of course, and released other dockets. I have gone through hearings, of course, even in the past. There are more layers and more questions that have arisen that we haven't received a response from. So we can absolutely proceed to a vote.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Flaherty, do you have further comments? No, thank you. Is there any further discussion on this docket 0100? Okay. Councillor Baker moves for passage of the state grant docket 0100. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Nay. It's the opinion, Madam Clerk, it is the opinion of the chair that the nays have it, but please call the roll.
Docket 0100, Councillor Royo.
No.
Councillor Royo, no. Councillor Baker.
Aye.
Aye. Councillor Baker, aye. Councillor Bok.
Nay.
Councillor Bok, nay. Councillor Braden. Councillor Braden, no. Councillor Campbell.
No.
Councillor Edwards. I'm sorry, Councillor Campbell, no. Councillor Edwards. No. Councillor Edwards, no. Councillor Asabi George.
Yes.
Councillor Asabi George, yes. Councillor Flaherty.
Yes.
Councillor Flaherty, yes. Councillor Flynn.
Yes.
Councillor Flynn, yes. Councillor Mejia.
No.
Councillor Mejia, no. Councillor O'Malley.
No.
Councillor O'Malley, no. And Councillor Wu. No. Councillor Wu, no. Mr. President, docket number 0100 has not passed. There are 4 in the affirmative and 8 in the negative.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to remove something from the green sheets may do so at this time. Seeing and hearing none, we're now moving on to the consent agenda. Been informed by the clerk that there are 0 additions to the consent agenda. The chair moves for the adoption of the consent agenda as presented. Madam Clerk, all those in favor of adopting the consent agenda, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. The consent agenda is hereby been adopted. Moving on to announcements. Do any councillors wish to make any announcements? The chair recognizes the at-large council from Dorchester, Councillor Asabi George. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'd like to thank, based on a resolution I had before the body last week, I'd like to thank Councilors Arroyo and Edwards in particular for their questions regarding the AOT bill that's up at the State House, House Bill 2121, and the resolution that I had before the body that now remains in committee. The hearing was on Monday, although I was unable to tune in as we had a few commitments here with this body. The hearing on Monday was fraught with participants arguing in favor and against the bill. The discussion raised more questions than answers, particularly around the intersection of severe mental illness, housing instability, and disabilities. Advocates asserted that AOT, assisted outpatient treatment, would lead to fewer incarcerations and more people in treatment. Opponents asserted that noncompliance with AOT treatment plans would be inevitable and lead to further incarceration, the concern that was brought up here before the body last week. What's clear is that creating a path to treatment is paramount. We are going to do a little bit more work on this and follow the committee report at the State House before we bring the matter back to the council. So it will remain on the green sheets, and I'll continue to update the body.
Thank you, Councillor Asabi George. Chair recognizes the District Council from East Boston, Councillor Edwards. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to note, a little over 20 years ago, I had the opportunity to learn from a great man. I was a freshman in Marymount College in New York, and he surprised me when he decided to open the class with an entire story about lemmings and what they do and how they commit massive suicide every year. He then proceeded to talk about the definition of power, and he said, forget all the politics and the names of it. It's really very simple. It's getting what you want, when you want, how you want, from who you want. That's it. And it was mind-blowing for me. I was 18 years old, and his influence throughout my life, through going to law school, becoming a lawyer, and then eventually getting into the art of politics as a politician. Professor James Weaver died recently, and he was my good friend and my mentor. I miss him deeply, and I just wanted to acknowledge that something special about your poli-sci professor when you're a politician. So I know he's up in heaven, probably meeting many of the lemmings that committed mass suicide and laughing with Nietzsche and all the other Machiavelli and laughing about politics and debating power, but I just want to say, rest in power and politics, Professor Weaver. You're a student forever.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. And I'm sorry, Professor Weaver's first name was James? Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. The chair recognizes the district council from South Boston. Councilor Flynn, the floor is yours. The chair, I will withdraw that. The chair recognizes the at-large councilor from Dorchester, Councilor Mejia. The floor is yours.
I was like, oh my God, I moved to Southie and I didn't know about it? Okay, sorry about that. So just really quick, wanted to acknowledge and thank, that I forgot to include Tanisha Sullivan, the president of the NAACP, for her hard work on this task force, the exam school, and all the other members that participated. You know, that was a volunteer. I know it was a volunteer position, and I know that there was a lot of politics around it, but I think that it's really important for us to acknowledge the heart work that a lot of people do in this city. And when I say heart, they're leading with their hearts. And that work is always a labor of love. And so when we have to fight for equity and justice for all, and every time I pledged allegiance to this flag, every council meeting, I always say in my head, all means all. Because when we talk about justice and equity, I often think that we're missing out on so many folks who are not here in this space represented in our conversation. So I just want to acknowledge Tanisha Sullivan for her hard work and pushing a lot of systems change here in the city of Boston. So grateful to her as well as to my staff. We've been through a lot in the last 2 years, coming into a space that nobody really wanted us in, but we still have found our way through the system here regardless. So we've had lots of thick skin to survive these last 2 years, and so Jacob, a big shout out to you. I know it has not been easy, but I just wanted to thank you for all your hard work. And the central staff, you guys have embraced us and have helped us and have given us a lot of guidance along the way. And to the clerk, Maureen Feeney, your style and pizzazz and just your guidance is incredibly appreciated. I just thank you so much for just always showing up and being so gracious. And thank you, President O'Malley. I am glad to see you able to be in this role. And I know that you're transitioning, but you will always be a Banilejo. You will always be Dominican. And while we still have 6 more months left in this work, I look forward to your continued leadership in this space. And to my colleagues who are on the kind of running, I just want to thank you all for showing up as you do. I know it's not, we're all here to do this work. And I know we're going to get called out in many different ways, but I just want us to always remember why we do what we do. And if we never lose sight of what our why is, we'll always remain grounded in what brought us here. So thank you to my colleagues for your continued leadership and how you show up.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. The chair recognizes the district councilor from South Boston, Councilor Flynn. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we heard about and read about and watched the video of the horrific hate crime, murder, recently in Winthrop. Over the weekend, I received a good call from my colleague and friend, Councilor Edwards, about it. Both people that were gunned down were public servants who served their country and their community. And one of them was an Air Force veteran who worked at the VA in Jamaica Plain, the same hospital that I go to. Certainly a hate crime, a homicide, a despicable act, murdering these public servants. This Air Force veteran's name was Ramona Cooper, and she was senselessly gunned down as she was crossing the street. She was willing to make sacrifices for our country, put herself in harm's way, serving us in the United States Air Force, but was murdered by a white supremacist. So our thoughts and prayers certainly go out to her and her family. This shows that we still have a tremendous work to do on discrimination and hate crimes that are increasing in this country. For two people who have sacrificed for their country and their community to be killed in such a way is a stark reminder of the discrimination, the violence, the hate that racism can be. Certainly it has no place in our country, and I always highlight the incredible contributions of veterans, community of color and immigrant veterans, African-American veterans, because they put their life on the line for our country in harm's way in Vietnam or Korea or stateside or Iraq or Afghanistan. And then when they come back to the United States, them and their families are victims of hate crimes or racism or discrimination. So I just want to express our sympathy to Ramona Cooper, who's a U.S. Air Force veteran. And at this time, I'd like to ask my colleague and friend, Councilor Edwards, if she would like to comment as well.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. The chair recognizes Councilor Lydia Edwards.
Thank you very much. As you know, I represent and live in East Boston, and Winthrop is it's basically our backyard. We're very close communities. And to hear what was happening and to see the impact, you know, my mother is a veteran, and you know that she's an Air Force veteran, and she worked at the VA. So there was this triggering for her to know that just existing was enough for this woman to die senselessly. But I wanted to bring up the State Trooper David Green, who served for this Commonwealth. He became a State Trooper in 1980. He served for about 36 years. And he, according to his neighbor, I think he kept people alive by heroically dying. He gave his own life and made the ultimate sacrifice for others. He came out of his house and as a result distracted the gunman. He was shot standing up, and he was also shot while he was on the ground. State troopers got information around him and gave him that respect, and at that moment, he died on the scene. I believe Ms. Cooper died in the hospital. That is why they were not information around her. I bring that up again. It was white supremacy that killed him. And I do know the gunman was shot and killed, but the fact of the matter is we need to say its name and say what it does. White supremacy kills. It kills. It is not to be taken lightly. It is not to be ignored. I'm glad this is being investigated as a hate crime, but that's what it was. And so we wanted to bring up Ramona and David today and make sure that we also adjourn in their name, of course, but also say the other name. It's white supremacy, and it's alive and well.
Thank you both, and we will, of course, be adjourning, and Ms. Cooper and Mr. Green as well. Before, though, I want to take prerogative of the chair for two quick announcements. One is, hope all councilors join us. I've ordered lunch in the Curly Room immediately, although at this point it might be closer to dinner. And then the second brief statement I wanted to make was to thank my Chief of Staff, Bill McGregor, whose last day serving the people of District 6 is today. Billy came in with me on November 30th, 2010. You're looking for him. He's not actually in the chamber. He's watching at home because he's with his beautiful baby daughter, Eloise, who came several months after Margot did, his and Lisa's first. And literally, we started day one. I found Billy, I first met Billy in the 5th grade, when we were 5 in kindergarten. And he is just a remarkable leader, and I owe so much of my success in this role and as an elected official because of him. If you know him, you love him. He's incredibly hardworking, incredibly loyal. And, you know, I have no biological brothers, but I've got a brother in Bill McGregor. So he starts his new job Tuesday. Today is his last day. I believe he is watching, although knowing him, I'm going to call him after, and he's going to say, oh, I missed it. But nevertheless, could we please give, in absentia, Bill McGregor a round of applause for a job well done through the years. So thank you. And of course, I'll be promoting Jessica Morris to my Chief of Staff, who's been with me not quite from day one, but shortly after. So thank you all. Any further Any further announcements? Seeing and hearing none. We are going to adjourn today's meeting in memory of the following individuals. For Councilor Lydia Edwards, Professor James Weaver. Yes, I'm sorry, please, if everyone would please stand. We will be adjourning per Lydia Edwards' request in honor of Professor James Weaver, and on behalf of the entire City Council, Ramona Cooper and David Green. A moment of silence, please. The chair moves that when the council adjourns today, it does so in memory of the aforementioned individuals and is scheduled to meet again in the Ionella Chamber on Wednesday, July 21st at 12 noon. All in favor of adjournment, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The council is hereby adjourned. Thank you, everybody.